Hello, this is Hal Herring with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. It's early summer here. I'm still up in northwestern Montana, out of Whitefish here. And we had a Backcountry Hunters and Anglers story night last night, campfire stories, I think they call it.
Yep.
And
Filson storytelling night. Yeah.
Yeah, right. CC Filson sponsored storytelling night. And one of the stories was Bill Hanlon, who is what is it, BHA board member or board chairman?
The chair of the British Columbia chapter of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
All right. Bill's out of Sparwood, British Columbia. He's active in about as many conservation efforts as anybody I've ever known. We've been talking nonstop for about 4 hours. But what we're going to talk about is an incredible find in the really far reaches of BC, right?
Yes.
And first, I want you talk a little bit about what you do up there and all that stuff. But this is. I heard this story last night, and as soon as I woke up this morning, I said, this is the podcast for the week or the day, if not the decade. So we got an Iceman, we've got like incredible backcountry running, we got glaciers, people melting out of glaciers.
Yep.
So first, introduce yourself a little bit, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Hal. My name is Bill Hanlon. I'm the chair of the British Columbia chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I'm also chair of the Hornaday Wilderness Society. It's a small but effective wilderness advocacy group out of the Elk Valley in British Columbia. I live in Sparwood, BC, with my wife, Sue. We have 3 children. They're all grown up now. My oldest son's in the Air Force. He's in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Getting married this summer. My middle son got married last summer. He's going to be a ministerial pastor. And our daughter is 20, and she plays basketball for the University of Alberta. So 3 very ambitious kids. We're very blessed. Wow. And live in an acreage, have a string of mountain horses that we do as much time as we can spend in the backcountry. So when we're not fighting for it, we're trying to enjoy it and get recharged by going back into the wilderness areas.
Right, sound like you spent a lot of time there.
As much as I can.
Yeah.
As much as I can.
And y'all are, I know you're real focused on sheep hunting.
Sheep hunting is my weakness. That's my biggest passion. If I have one vice in my life, it's sheep hunting. And we're
what
fortunate.
Kind of sheep?
We're fortunate in British Columbia. We have 3 of the 4 wild sheep in North America. So we have Rocky Mountain Bighorns in the area that I live in the Southern Rockies, and then we have stone sheep in Northern BC and Dall sheep in two limited entry wildlife management units in the very northwest corner of British Columbia.
Right. And you're telling me one of those units is immense, right?
It's both of those units, 628 and 629. 629 being the Tatshenshini Elsack Wilderness Park, and talked about that in the presentation last night. It's the Tatshenshini Elsack Provincial Park combined with the Kluane National Park in the Yukon and the Wrangell, St. Elias, and Glacier Bay National Parks in Alaska is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the largest protected area in the world. It's 21 million acres of pure, fully functioning ecosystem. There's no buildings, development, roads within this entire area. Spawning salmon, natural salmon runs, and grizzly bears and eagles and Dall sheep and caribou and moose and everything else that goes with these large protected wilderness areas.
Wow. And it goes to the salt.
And it goes right to the ocean, yes. Yeah. And the St. Elias Range, so the highest range in North America is there in Mount St. Elias, and the highest mountain in Canada. And and that's probably
is St. Elias.
St. Elias is
gotcha.
Yeah, and so that segues into our story of are we ready for that to dive into?
I think we are, man. Because like you said last night, it's like, man, I'm doing a 20-minute version.
I'm doing 20 years and 20 minutes last night for the Filson storytelling night.
It's like putting it into a compactor and then everybody jumping on it.
And everybody wondering what the heck you just said.
Yeah, but it came off well. I mean, it's just I don't know, man. Let's go ahead into it. I'm gonna do a lot less interviewing because you've been at this for so long. I just if anything needs clarifying, I'll jump.
Okay.
But I know, it's one of the most interesting. The spruce root hat.
The spruce root hat. That was the connector, eh?
So and then although you do an enormous, I don't know about enormous, you do a lot of pack string work. Yeah. With mostly horses, right? Not as many mules.
Yeah. No, we have a few mules for a couple of the outfitters I work for. Yeah. I do some guiding for them and some summer pack trips. But I have horses, just horses. So
gotcha. So what I was getting at, you knew exactly when we were talking about the grass behind the mountains.
Yeah, grass beyond the mountains, and rancher takes a wife, and nothing to do good for a cowboy.
Right. And that's north. Is that some of this country?
That's halfway between the Elk Valley and the Tatshenshini. In the center is the Caribou Chilcotin, and it's just west of Quesnel and Prince George in the Anaheim Lake country where these books were written by Rich Hobson in, I think in the 20s and 30s.
Right. And they're pretty fascinating.
They're pretty fascinating stories about the last great cattle frontier in North America.
Yeah. And so y'all are driving from the Elk Valley, Sparrowwood area. How far is it to where you go to the Tatshenshini?
It's 2,000 miles, so 3,000 kilometers, right from our doorstep to the banks of the Tatshenshini River.
Okay.
And we drive from southeast British Columbia into Alberta, into northwestern British Columbia, into Yukon Territory, and then down back into British Columbia to hunt. Okay. And it's a limited entry hunt for Dall sheep in that 629 unit, and it took us about 6 years to actually finally draw a tag.
Gotcha.
And that was in 1999 was the original hunt that we finally got these Dall sheep tags.
Okay, and this is a backpack hunt, though,
This
right?
is a backpack hunt. Yeah.
Okay.
If I want to relax, I backpack hunt. If I want to be on all the time, where you have the responsibility for a string of horses, then I bring my horses. It saves some boot leather, but in terms of the amount of work that you have to do, and you can bring a few more amenities into the backcountry, and it's a different experience. It's the smell of that leather and canvas and horse sweat, and just the satisfaction you get with well-trained animals working in rough country. It's just it's so satisfying.
You bet.
Yet when I'm backpack hunting, when I put my pack down and I wake up in the morning, my pack's feeding me. I'm not chasing it all over Hell's Half Acre, listening for bells and trying to catch a hobbled horse that knows what he's planning to do that day. We got 25 miles ahead of us and some steep country. And so that's why I enjoy both. I'm a backpacker with horses. I kind of was a backpacker first, and then got into horses. But I live to horse hunt, to use my horses to hunt sheep.
Gotcha. When those your wife was saying last night, when y'all come back from these Tatshenshini backpack trips, it's just like everything is burned away.
There's not exactly. We don't have any. We don't even have any body odor left. I mean, you're running that pure and that lean.
I thought it was really interesting perspective because that's what I know that's what it takes.
Yeah.
It's like there's just like nothing extraneous left.
There's nothing exactly. We're running pretty lean by the before we even start the trips, and then we usually lose about 10 pounds on a frame that you can't afford to lose 10 pounds.
you're kind of low on real power when you get back. You can walk a long way.
I get cold fast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about what y'all found in there.
Well, okay. This story is usually takes place with a complete slideshow presentation. So I have slides to prompt me, which we have in front of us today, so we can actually look at them. But it's the story of Kwadidan-Sinchi, which translates into long ago person found from the Southern Tatshenshini language. And this discovery took place in 1999 on a Dall sheep hunt in the Tatshenshini-Alsac Wilderness Park. Okay. So I'll walk you through kind of one. We've already talked a little bit about it, so I'll be able to cruise through it, but I even have my notes here, Hal, so I can I can look at it'll. It can help me.
You bet.
Jog my memory and not miss anything. And it's more when I speak. I don't like using notes when I speak on stage, right? But I have to look, and it'll jog my memory, particularly in some of the science and the First Nations stuff, and I want to get it right.
Okay, you bet.
And there's just so much information now because this story is now 4 sequels, like we said earlier. It's 20 years in the making. Well, next year will be 20 years.
It's been the subject of a huge archaeological book, right?
Yes, and we'll talk about that at the end in terms of the book that just came out.
Okay,
and we can go from there. But
first, give me a hunter's perspective. What does this place look like? Like where are you launching to? What's the visuals here?
Well, we park on it's the Haines Highway south of Haines Junction, Yukon. We park on the banks of the Tatshenshini River. So it's a glacial river. So it fluctuates daily with as the ice melts, especially in the warm summer. It's almost like spring freshet in August. As these glaciers melt, the river rises during the heat of the day, and then in the evening it cools down again. So these rivers basically pulse all day. So we try to time our first crossing because we have to wade across the river. And then we have to wade across the Parton River almost immediately after that, 20 minutes later down the trail. Okay. And then we're virtually at alpine. So the entire trip is in alpine habitat.
Tree line's pretty low there.
Tree line's pretty low there, yeah. At the Yukon BC border. So it's a backpack trip in. It's quite a ways in. I'll try to use miles instead of our metric system up where I'm from. I translated last night for everyone.
I think everybody was glad.
These Canadians talking about. But so as we're walking into it, again, I can just kind of cruise through. We talk about the drive from the southeast corner of British Columbia through Alberta into BC, back into Yukon, back down into the Tatshenshini, which is this yellow square there.
Gotcha.
I always use this as it's the traditional territory of the Champagne and Asiac First Nations, which the Tatshenshini Alsac Provincial Park is a co-managed park between the BC government and the Champagne and Asiac First Nations.
Okay.
Again, this is the World Heritage Site, the Killarney, Wrangell, St. Elias, Glacier Bay, Tatshenshini Alsac. So that's the largest protected area in the world, conserving our natural heritage. Here's the banks of the Tatshenshini River, late model truck,
right?
And
Gotcha.
big, freighter frame backpacks with moose bags, moose bags, and so that was 20 years ago.
These are the 1999 trips.
This is the 1999 trips. Yeah. So now we're heading into I always throw my partners under the bus because when we said Dall sheep hunting, Warren thought we said duck hunting. So he's dressed like he's going duck hunting right there.
With his rubber waders.
With his rubber waders.
Right on.
But like I said, the first thing we have to do is get across the river.
Gotcha.
And then Mike, because he had hip or chest waders on, he ends up packing us both across the river. So that's a good hunting partner when he can pack everything, including his partners.
You need the larger model.
That's right. Yeah, we call him Pack Mike for a reason.
Yeah.
And so that, again, looking into the country, it's
you're looking into
from the beginning.
Yeah, the tree line's low, and it's kind of it's not tundra.
No, it's not tundra, but it's it's low scrub on the river bottom because it floods out and everything.
Right.
It's very low, very little vegetation.
Yeah.
It used to be a old seismic exploration road in there for some mining exploration before it became a provincial park in the early 90s. And so we're basically walking up that seismic road for the first, probably 15 miles anyways.
Gotcha.
Yes, 18 miles. But you can see that, it gets quite rugged in terms of terrain. Again, then we hike across have to cross the Parton River right away. And it's a little more of a swift water river as compared to the Tatshenshini where we crossed it at the highway. But very, high mountain peaks. And
so you're coming into the glacier country within about 20 miles?
Within about 20 miles, we're in the glacier country.
Yeah.
But again, it's the most spectacular thing about the sheep hunting there is 360 degrees sheep habitat. It is absolutely every direction you look in. So you're not traveling fast because you want to sit in glass. You want to kind of let your binoculars do the walking. And one of our techniques, of course, is we dump our heavy pack, set up our camp for the day, and then we climb up on a ridge, sit down with a huge viewscape in front of us, and as opposed to smelling up the country and disturbing the countryside, we sit there and wait for the sheep to do the moving. And you think that white sheep or white spots are easy to find. There's more white rocks out there than you know what to do with. And of course, all the sheep are dirty too, so it's really hard to find until they move. So again, set up our camps and then get up on a ridge top and sit in glass. Mike was fortunate enough on the second day to kill a beautiful Dall ram. Yeah. And they're being a thin horn ram, we have the legal definition of a thin horn ram is to the eye or to the bridge of the nose, the horn tip to the bridge of the nose, or you actually have to count the annula. It has to be 8 years or older. Wow. So this was 11-year-old ram. So he shot this one on age as opposed to the full curl over the tip of the nose. Yeah. So we were fortunate to find big, heavy, mature ram within 2 days of the road. On our second day in. Yeah. We were able to climb up into an ice patch. Kind of dig ourselves a little freezer into the ice and marked it with some ribbon so we knew where to find it, hopefully protect it from predators, and it was going to stay because we were planning to be in there for 10 days and we're not going to pack this meat around and just go bad on us. So we did what we could to preserve all the meat.
Do you eat some of it there?
We do a little bit. Yeah, we do a little bit. But generally, our cooking utensils are designed to boil water. Yeah, I freeze dried food.
We talked about that yesterday. Yeah. I was just carrying around that jet bowl, and I was getting real paranoid because it quit. Yeah. So
gotcha. we do the odd thing called sheep's kebabs. So we'll put on a stick, and then if we do have some firewood, and then on the way into this country, there was some firewood. We could cut down some willow, some old dry dead willow, and have enough for a fire to cook, or cook it over the small stove that we had. Yeah. Like I said, it used to be a mine site, and since that time, it's all been cleaned up by the Champagne and Asiac First Nation and BC Parks. They have summer work crews that go in there, and they cleaned up all the old mining debris. And so as we get in, again, being in that close to the coast, we're probably within 50 miles of the coastline. And it's where, and these huge glacier fields, it's where weather is generated, weather's created there. So it's really, you have a window of opportunity about the middle 2 weeks of August that is going to be the best bet for decent weather.
Yeah.
Before that, it's very wet. After that, it's starting getting into fall. And so there's kind of like there's a prime time to be in this country if you want to maximize, good weather, or at least the chance of good weather.
Are the mosquitoes bad in there?
They're not bad. They're tolerable. They seem to, by mid-August, it cools down enough at nighttime, so at least the bug machine shuts off for a few hours, at night. And then you wake up in the morning and it's cold and there's frost and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in the mid-heat of the day, yes, there's lots of flies. And it depends where you are. If you're up glassing on a ridge and the wind's blowing, that's why the sheep are up there. There's no bugs. But when you get down, if you're camping too down low along the water, along the rivers or streams, then you're going to be, there's black flies and sand flies and no-see-ums and mosquitoes. And so there's enough to keep you hopping, that's for sure. Again, get up high, large landscapes, and just spectacular wild country. Too bad these podcasts aren't
more visual.
More visual, but that's okay.
If I was sure, I might not have a job.
What are you saying? We both have good faces for radio?
Yeah, there you go.
But huge, big sheep basins, and all game sheep trails and sheep beds. And so again, as you're traveling through the land, you're recognizing the habits of the wildlife and the weather patterns and the winds and the thermals and all the things that predators on the landscape do.
Yeah.
And so you have a more kind of connection to the land than you do if you're a tourist or if you're racing through the place.
Right, sure.
As a photographer or whatever the case is, you seem to be more connected and in tune to what you're looking for, and that's Dall sheep. Now we're starting to look into some of the rock and the ice, and again, get up high. If we spot rams in distant basins, we know at least we have a future opportunity. Yeah. And so again, it's the whole idea is to learn the land without getting too.
I know nobody can see this but me, but so there's obviously a game trail down the halfway up that. No,
that's just a big mineral, like a big mineral
just a
line.
break.
Yeah, just a break, and it looks like a game trail. But there's game trails all down further.
Is there any way to go cross country in this country? Or is it,
you got to pick your route.
It's just drainage
by drainage, and you pick your route. And if there's a high pass, you can get over and down into the next one. You can do that. That's what we try to do. To get to this particular place, we went. The easiest route was this old seismic trail into this mine site, and then from there, after that, it's you go anywhere you want or where you physically can.
Yeah,
And that's the thing about backpacking. You have a little more freedoms that you can go places your horses can't.
Yeah, for sure.
Go, and there's not a lot of grass here where we're hunting.
So
there's
you
not
have
a lot
to be
of places
packing feed.
You'd be packing feed, or just you have to camp where there is grass, and there's no place to tie your horses up. You're tying them head to tail, and they'll. So it's usually it's a little different game up here in this far north with horses.
Yeah.
So again, looking into the rock and ice, and again starting getting these massive, millions of glaciers. Just it's incredible just how vast the landscapes are with pockets of habitat where the sheep are going to be.
Yeah.
So these are called ice patches that kind of melt away from the main parent glacier.
Yeah.
Here we are having this is about 5:00 in the afternoon, and I've got a ram spotted way up in some chimneys in this high peak, and this ram obviously was spooked by something because it's all by itself. It's a big full curl ram, and we stopped for a quick power bar break, and Mike and Warren, my two hunting partners, are saying, "Okay, get going. How are you going to make a play on that guy? He's in a pretty tricky place." And fortunately, it's daylight till midnight up there, so at this time of year. And so we still had a lot of time ahead of us. But so anyways, I went up and made a play on this ram, and I killed a beautiful full curl Dall ram.
This is all on the same trip?
It's all on the same trip.
Holy smokes.
So we killed one on the second day, and this is about the fifth day where I shot a ram. And again, it's an all-night affair. By the time you get the ram, recover it, cape it, take all the meat off, debone it all. We're a drainage away from our camp. Mike and Warren make it up to where I am, taking all the sheep apart. We get some pictures. It's 4:00 in the morning before we crawl back in the tent again. So you're kind of wired the next day. You're in the zone.
Yeah.
You're just, it's really hard to come down from that adrenaline rush. It almost takes you a day to recover. Yeah. So the next day was kind of foggy and rainy. And so a day to do all the camp chores and salt the cape, cape out the head.
Yeah.
And salt it all, prepare it so it's not going to go bad. Do the same with the meat, do the same kind of thing we did with Mike's ram, buried into an ice patch and into the snow so it's going to stay cool. And then, looking for a third ram for Warren now, because we had what's called a group hunt. So we all had three tags, so we could all harvest a ram. Yeah. This picture is ironic only because over my left shoulder is the actual discovery site 2 days later.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of...
it's a long way away.
It's a long way away, yeah. We're covering some big country, a lot of vertical real estate. You're either going up or you're going down. There's a lot. The only place that's flat is where we usually put our tent.
Yeah, right.
So here we are. That's the next day after I shot my ram, and we're again, it's a recovery day. We're kind of trying to eat as much as you can and refuel, and we'll eat some of the sheep as well, just to have some of that protein boost and get the skulls all salted and everything, and the lower jaws taken off, and the whole works to reduce the weight of our packs on the way out. So about day 7, now we're heading into where we saw those rams previously, and we're looking for a ram for Warren now. So the decisions you make in the land, like I mentioned earlier, that you know what the thermals are going to be doing at certain times of the day. You know what the weather's doing that day. And where those rams were, if we went in from the bottom, which would have been the easy direction, by the time we got there, the thermals would have been blowing up for the day, and the rams would have smelt us long before we got there.
Right.
So we would have never seen them.
Gotcha.
So we decided to go the difficult route up through these glaciers and ice patches to come in from above, because by the time we got there, the winds would be in our favor. And so that's what we did. And again, so the decisions you make on the land are based on your predatory instincts and what you learn when you're out there.
Right.
So we went up the draw and up into these ice patches and started walking through these ice patches. And we, again, because it's daylight till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, you got a long day to hunt.
Right.
So
you're kind of never in a hurry.
You're never in a hurry. You try to slow down to that, and then so you recognize and you notice a lot more things when you're slowing down. You don't have to get someplace. You're kind of you're where you're at. You're where you're supposed to be. Those rams could have moved in the last couple of days because we hadn't seen them since. Yeah. So we knew they were around somewhere. We just were going to go into the big green basin where we knew there was habitat for them.
So I'm saying, look at these big pictures of the glaciers. Do those glaciers have names, or are they just part of a system?
This glacier system is called the Samuel Glacier.
Okay.
And it's 3 major river systems that come out of this, and it's the Tatshenshini, the Parton River, and the O'Connor River. Okay. And they all come out of this enormous glacier system. And I think that's part of the presentation when the audience can see the slides and just show how a spectacular landscape this is. It's not your normal landscape to hunt in.
Right.
And so we get into the headwaters of this, what the First Nations call Empty Valley, because it is that. It is empty. There's not even lichen on the rocks yet. The ice is so recently receded from as these glaciers start to recede from climate change. Again, the most spectacular place we've ever sat and had lunch. And as we're sitting there having lunch, as we're sitting in this enormous glacier complex.
This is in Empty Valley.
This is in Empty Valley having lunch. We're talking about how we're going to make a play on these rams. And there's a big ice patch in front of us between us and this basin that's just kind of around the corner. And so I suggest to Mike and Warren, I said, Mike, let's just skate right across this ice patch. Again, it's going to cut off, miles of rough walking in rugged, melted, half snow, half rock, half mud, half ice kind of terrain, and we can go right across that ice patch, right into that basin, and kind of be there, and have a good hunt this afternoon. And Mike and Warren, whoa, we can't go on these glaciers. I said, what do you mean you can't go on these glaciers? Well, we promised our wives we wouldn't. So I use them again. I throw them under the bus and joke about them. And then I say, well, I have a note from my wife, so I can go across that glacier. Yeah. But since we can't all go, what's the alternative? So as we're looking down the edge of the glacier, this ice patch.
So they really had promised their wives that they wouldn't do glacier travel?
They actually said that. They would not climb on any glaciers, unless we absolutely had to. But it was our choice. We're going to or not. No, we're not going to. We have alternatives. So we decided to go around it, and
this being because they thought they were
crevasses, and then there's just the danger of walking on particularly new snow over old ice.
Sure.
You don't know if it's bridged or crevasses or moraines or so anyways, we decided we're looking at this big wall of ice, and he says, Mike said, let's just walk down this gravel bar along this wall of ice. We'll stay out of sight from this basin in case the sheep are, visible. Yeah. And it's kind of looks cool anyways. And it's all melting out, and the ice was all undercut and kind of a stream flowing underneath, and it was all blue ice. And like I said, it's like a 20-foot wall of ice that we're walking along. So we start walking along this wall of ice, and I said, hey, Mike, look, a stick. And I pick up a stick. And I mean, a stick stood out because we're in a stark landscape. There's two things. There's rock and there's ice. Yeah. And I pick up a stick and I said, hey, Mike, we're not the first people to hunt here. And then oh, cool, look at that. And we looked at it, and it was probably about 2 feet long. Then I put it back in the ground, but it was a nice dowel-looking shape, so it looked like it had been shaped. So we put it back in the ground and walked a little further, and Mike picked up another stick. He said, "Hey, Bill, look, this looks like it fits the one you just had. What'd you do with it?" "Well, I just left it on the rocks back there." "Well, go get it." So I ran back up and picked up the stick, and when I got back to Mike, he had already picked up a third stick, and he says, "Bill, these aren't sticks. These are artifacts." You get a little tingle up your spine. And he says, he says they used to throw spears with these or arrows with these. It begins with an A. We're both teachers, so we're not archaeologists or whatever. And so he finally goes, atlatl. He says they used to throw, this was an atlatl. And he's making the throwing motion with his atlatl.
Sure.
So we think it is. And the two sticks that we did find actually fit together. They were broken on the joint. So Mike did notice that right away.
Yeah.
And then immediately after that, Warren, we're just kind of leapfrogging each other, going around, in front of each other along this wall of ice, down this gravel bar. And Warren goes, "Hey, guys." And he points up on the ice and he says, "I think I found the poor fellow that lost all this stuff." And then we get a real electric current go through us.
Yeah.
And this is where I joke again. I had a note from my wife, so I was able to climb up on the ice to see what this smudge was that Warren was looking at. And he's using his binoculars. He's pointing and looking through his binoculars, 20 feet up on the ice kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I climb up there, and I look at it's like a bag of mush on the ice surface. And then when I look closely, right on the top, there was a sheath knife looking object. Like it was actually in a leather sheath and had a wooden handle coming out. And I picked it right up off the top of this bag of mush or a bag of hides. And I slid it out like you would slide a sheath knife out of its sheath, and a belt knife. And I pulled this tool out, and I looked at it, and the guy's going, "What's that? What's that?" I said, "I don't know, but it's not something that is modern by any stretch of the imagination." I slipped it back in, and then I looked down at what was below me at my feet, and the most recent snow had just melted off of it.
Yeah.
And it was basically a bag of hides. It looked like a pack or some kind of robe or what it was. But there was little fringes, and you could see little stitches. So it was actually man-made.
Right.
So that's the first indication that we had something that was man-made, and first indication that it was something that was old. Then we looked around because there was bones on the ice surface, or a little spongy. I picked one up, and it was like a small finger bone or something. It was very spongy.
Yeah.
Didn't feel right, so I put it back down where I found it, and then trying not to step on anything. And then I looked behind me, and about a meter away, 5 feet away from me was something else sticking up out of the ice, and it turned out to be the pelvis of a human pelvis sticking up out of the ice, and with still flesh on it and everything. And then the legs you could see going down into the ice. It's hard to tell in this picture, but the legs are going down into the ice. So I said, "Hey guys, there's a body up here. There's human remains here."
If you had a note to get up here, you'd see them too.
So I said, "If you guys, I won't tell your wives. If you guys want to skate up here, I'll sign for you." Yeah. So anyways, they climbed up there, and then we had, it's just, we had more questions than answers. Yeah. It was quite, there wasn't a lot there to tell us what we had. And again, none of us are archaeologists or had come across anything like that before in the past. So we had more questions than answers. Yeah. But we knew it was old. We knew it was man-made, and we knew there was human remains with it. We'd taken everything else apart. We'd taken grizzly bears apart. We'd taken mountain lions and moose and caribou and elk and sheep and everything else. So we knew that it wasn't an animal. Right. And so right from the beginning, we respected that it was human remains, and so we didn't disturb anything. The artifacts we brought out with us were to show that we weren't crazy mad, that we had been in the wilderness too long, that and to show that we had some kind of artifacts, and maybe this would somebody that an archaeologist would be able to tell by the artifacts that yes, this is significant. Let's go back and take a look, kind of stuff, and convince them that go back and take a look at this. So again, the original discovery was not very many clues to tell us what it was, and we needed a professional to tell us. The object that we were looking at, that bag of hides on the ice, turned out to be his Arctic ground squirrel robe, and it was made from 95 Arctic ground squirrels, and it was sewn together. It was 5 rows of 19 hides, and it was sewn together with mountain goat sinew, twisted together with blue whale and humpback whale sinew.
Okay.
So when they did the DNA research on the robe, the just went off the charts in every direction. They've never seen that kind of combination between a mountain goat and a whale combined together.
And a ground squirrel.
And a ground squirrel and a moose hide collar. And there was a fifth animal. They weren't sure if it was beaver or badger hair that was on the robe as well.
Right.
And the shoulders were reinforced. The seams were greased and stained with red ochre. Red ochre is an iron ore that used to stain and color.
Yep.
So they would add, color to the inside in particular, and probably mix it in with whatever grease or oil they used to waterproof the seams. The seams were about, they were within a quarter inch of each other. Very fine, probably sewn with like a fishbone needle kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And with a very micro stitching. Yeah, exactly. So we kept on hunting. We just we had a bunch of questions. We were now kind of distracted, but we're still so far back that we're about 35 miles from the truck. So we still have a lot of hunting to do ahead of us. We're on our 7th day. By the time we get back to the camp, we know it's a 2-day march back to the truck with 100-pound packs, because we have 2 rams down and hopefully a third one. But anyways, we're still heading into this basin. We still got the rest of the day to hunt. And we see some moose horns right on the ice patch. Just below where the remains were found, we see a moose. And my friend, who had hunted there 10 years before, so in 1989, said, keep an eye out for the moose in the ice, because the whole moose is in the ice. So in 10 years' time, It went from the whole moose in the ice to just the skull cap and horns sliding down the ice surface further and further every year.
Gotcha.
So there's a picture of the whole moose in the ice.
And that was a long time ago?
This was they carbon dated the moose as well.
Yeah.
And the moose has been there since 1960.
Okay.
So at that time it was 40 years old.
Yeah.
But and it's slowly decomposed. Still, most of the moose is in the ice, but bones and skulls and things are now sliding down the ice surface. So it's slowly. They thought there was a connection between the moose and the person.
I'm sure
there might have been a hunting connection, so to speak.
Sure.
But the moose get up on this ice to get out of the flies. They just get out on the ice to just have some reprieve from the black flies and everything like that. So that's
so for the people who sadly can't see it.
Yeah,
that's an incredible photo of that moose horn sticking out of that
1989. Exactly. So I'll show you as the sequence.
I wish you were here, man. You'd be seeing this stuff too.
Well, maybe at the next rendezvous if things go right. So we get back to camp that night, and again, we're just like school kids, just chirping and chirping. We have so many questions. And who do we report this to? And how old is it? And who is it? And all these kind of questions. Is it somebody that kind of escaped humanity and wanted to get back to nature?
So at this time, you didn't know it was ground squirrel hides.
We didn't know. We didn't know any of that stuff.
Right.
We didn't know any of that stuff. We just knew that it was something that was man-made and the human remains next to it.
Yeah, gotcha.
So that's all we had. And again, we had to. It's not like there was a body there, just parts and pieces of the body. And the pelvis sticking up and the lower torso in the ice. So then we had a 2-day trek with 100-pound packs, all the meat and cape and horns. And to get back to the truck, and we're talking the whole time, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? If we have to go through Yukon to get back into British Columbia, then the first major center in BC is Fort Nelson. The first kind of major government center is Fort St. John. That's almost 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
So we're going, they don't know anything about this area, so who should we report it to? So on our way back, when we finally get back to the truck, 2 days later, we have a brochure in the back of the truck that we picked up on the way there, Yukon brochure, and it's called the Beringia Museum, or Yukon Beringia Interpretive Center. And again, it's a museum about the Bering Land Bridge and 10,000 years ago, when there's mammoths and short-faced bears and giant beavers and all these different things that came across the steppe from Asia, and the peoples that followed. And so we pounded on the door about 8 o'clock at night when we got into Whitehorse, and there was a student in there, and he was vacuuming, cleaning up after the tourists left for the day, and he unlocked the door and opened the door and asked what we were, pounding on the door for. We're sorry, we're closed.
What do you people want?
What the heck you guys want? You're looking a little grubby. And so we explained that we said we have these artifacts, and we discovered something that we need to report it to an archaeologist. Is there somebody that works with an interpretive center that we can talk to? And again, it's not a coincidence. It's not circumstance, it's not serendipity. It's finding something of significance, we're not really looking for it. But again, it's just another one of those things that the first person that we actually report this to, other than the student that we talked to, he said, you need to talk to Greg Hare. He's a site assessment archaeologist with the Yukon government. He's been doing an ice patch study. As these ice patches are receding, they're spitting out moccasins and arrowheads and arrows and all these other artifacts. He'll know who to talk to right away. So he had his number in their Rolodex because, I mean, we need to borrow the phone. It was a pre-cell phone and all that kind of stuff. Sure. So it was 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 by the time we finished yattering, and he lets us use his desk phone, of course, and so we phoned Greg, and he just got back from his ice patch studies. He uses that same middle 2 weeks in August when the weather's the best, where they can count on helicopter travel and all that stuff to get their research team out to these glaciers. And so we explained to Greg that we found these artifacts and tried to explain what they were and told him exactly where we were, or tried to. I mean, before GPS and that kind of stuff. For us, helicopters had it, but we didn't have it.
Right.
And explained, oh, by the way, Greg, there's human remains with these artifacts we brought out. So that got him excited. So he says, well, you guys, it's too late right now. I just got back from the field. You guys go get a hotel and have some dinner, clean up. I'll see you at 8 o'clock in the morning at the Beringia Center. We can see what you got, and we'll go from there. So the next morning, 8 o'clock, we're there, and Greg's there with another archaeologist. Her name is Ruth Goddard, and we had all the artifacts out on the table of the picnic table there at the Beringia Center. We had them in the cooler overnight so they wouldn't decompose because, again, they are ancient. They are old. Well, they're artifacts of some sort. And so we put them on the table, and they were flabbergasted. They hadn't seen anything like that. They actually thought it was an atlatl as well. They called this a man tool, the little knife that came out of the sheath, the little fringe. So we brought out what we thought was the atlatl, one of the walking sticks, piece of fringe that was on the bag of hides, and the sheath that the knife came in, and the knife itself.
And just real quick, so in my life, I always thought frontiersmen used the fringes because they were so cool looking.
They were cool looking,
and they could be even cooler when the wind was blowing.
That's right.
Tell them what y'all found out.
Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and all those kinds. The fringes on their jackets or on their pants. They were designed to draw the water off the garment. It created a path of least resistance to draw the water off.
I mean, that's just mind blowing to me that people figured that out.
They had that technology that long ago.
It's like there's those fringes from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Exactly, and they were cut in that for that reason. To whatever it caused the water to come down, they would draw it off.
Yeah,
the bag.
It's like form and function because you do look cool.
Yeah,
when you got the fringes.
That's right. I wanted a Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone jacket. It was so bad when I was a kid.
Everybody,
the coonskin hat and the musket. Oh, you know it. You know
and
it.
The fringes are form and function.
Form and function. Exactly. Yeah. So again, it was almost immediate that they recognized that we had something of significance, and they wanted to get into the site right away. Fortunately, Greg had helicopters booked through his ice patch studies. He knew who to contact in terms of RCM, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because again, it's human remains. They haven't been identified yet.
Right.
He knew who to contact with the First Nations because it's traditional territory, the Champagne and Asiatic, and he knew the sensitivities around these things. So he was able to contact their cultural representatives and people, and so he had a helicopter full in a couple hours. By 10 o'clock that morning, he offered us to come in with him, and we said, well, we got a 2,000-mile drive ahead of us.
Right, you've been out 2 weeks,
we've been out 2 weeks, and again, left my wife at home with 3 young kids, and so it was time to get home. Yeah. And we said, you can't get us all in a helicopter anyways. You're going to have to make a couple trips as it is. Let's look for the moose horns. You'll be at the Rice Ice Patch when you have the moose horns. And we gave them our
what a cool way to mark it. Yeah.
We still run with topographical maps. I can't go anywhere without a topographical map, because if my GPS, I don't have a GPS, I still refuse to carry one. And again, if my batteries crap out, or it's bad weather, or you're in a canyon or something like that, and you're not getting a signal, my map always has a signal. Right. And I can read a topographical
I'm with
map.
You, man.
And that's a fail-safe system that I have to.
And we're looking at this, but if people listening to this get a chance, if you do this presentation at Rendezvous or wherever, I highly recommend somebody come watch it, because the visual imagery in here is incredibly cool. But it's like neither me nor you are Luddites. You're running this on a MacBook Pro.
Exactly.
It's simply that in the deep backcountry, and it's happened to me recently, and I ain't going to talk about it, but that I'm not comfortable with relying on anything that runs on a battery.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And backup for our flashlights or headlamps or whatever that we're going to actually depend on when we need it. And no, I'm the same way. Yeah. I'm the same way. So almost immediately, Greg Hare and his team flew into the site. And again, I'm able to show visuals on these slides and pictures of what it would look like that day. The weather had already started to deteriorate.
Yeah.
They were in there in their rain gear and everything.
You're in, say, August what?
This is August. When the discovery was August 14th.
Okay.
So it was 15th, 16th. It was the morning of the 17th or 18th. I think it was the 18th before they finally got back in there.
Yeah.
It took us that long to get, from the actual discovery. So things had melted for another 3 or 4 days before they actually got in there to take a look at it.
Yeah.
The weather was starting to deteriorate. So their first look at the discovery site was very brief and to identify, yes, there's human remains there. Yes, this isn't contemporary by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, we need to start putting in the things we need to do to recover these remains.
Yeah.
Again, when the helicopter was hovering over the site, when they were first checking out to make sure they had the right ice patch, they saw something flutter away from the location. And when they landed the helicopter and they went immediately to where this object fluttered away from, it turned out to be this woven spruce root hat that got your attention last night. So,
this image of that is one of the coolest hats
and we
I've
hadn't
ever seen in my whole life.
We never saw that.
Right.
We never saw that. I didn't see that hat till years later, till they had it curated in Yukon Archaeological Branch office is where I finally saw it.
And it was made of
woven spruce roots.
And the roots are pounded into fiber?
I don't know how they harvest the roots in trees that grow in sandy soil, so they're long, straight roots. They're not rocky soil roots that are all bent and crooked and kinked. Yeah. So they're very long, straight roots, and the process of refining them to use them for the fibers that they need to wove a hat that centuries later is still woven so tight it'll hold water. Yeah. That's amazing technology or amazing skills that they had then.
And it's a thing of absolute beauty as well.
Yes, yeah.
And look at it.
And when they started looking at it closer, there was some kind of symbols on it. It was stained with red ochre again. But it was a working hat. It was your traveling hat. It was to protect you from the sun and the wind and the rain and everything else, kind of thing like that. Yeah. It wasn't a ceremonial hat. It was your working everyday hat.
Gotcha.
Kind of thing. And so again, looking at when the recovery team went in there, and again, I show visuals that show the wall of ice that we walked across, the basin we were trying to get into where the rams were. It just puts people are there. They can experience exactly what we saw from our perspective, and again from the perspective of the scientists that went in there immediately. So then it took another 4 or 5 days or a week to put together a forensic team to go in there to recover the remains, as well as they were at the same time, they're trying to put these conditions together. The First Nations were putting conditions together like how long, if research is allowed, that no pictures of the remains will ever be published, out of respect for the person, that no parts of his body will be destroyed in any of the research, like they couldn't destroy some for carbon dating or anything like that. So, because it was unprecedented that the First Nations allowed government and science to have a look at their remains for very political reasons we don't need to get into.
Right, I remember when all that's been going on. Sure.
Yeah. So, and again, it was the Champagne and Asiacs. They were very visionary and very forward-looking to be able to say, yes, this is going to benefit our community.
Yeah.
So again, then I started showing pictures of the recovery team, and it includes people like Dr. Owen Beatty, and he wrote the book, The Franklin Expedition. So he's one of the few people on Earth that have the experience working with frozen remains that are coming out of the ice after centuries of being entombed in ice. So he was there.
That's what he does.
That's what he does. And Al Mackey, who's an archaeologist with the Yukon or with the British Columbia government, and then Greg Hare, of course, and some of the First Nations, some Champagne and Asiac First Nations, some of their people that deal with ancient artifacts and such like that. So they were able to recover everything they could find. They high frequency radar scanned the glacier. They found his upper torso about 5 or 6 feet under the ice, right underneath the robe. Right under the robe, they found his upper torso. Yeah, and recovered all the parts and pieces they could find. They ended up finding about 30 artifacts altogether on the ice patch. And as they're putting all the information together and pieces together, they realized that they didn't all come from him. So this was a known trade route or travel route over the centuries. So then once they exhumed the body and they were able to transport it down to the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, and it was they had a special room prepared that mimicked the humidity and the environment of the glacier, so things wouldn't decompose while they were in storage, while science was having a chance to research the remains. And again, just the science behind how to preserve, ancient glacier mummies, ancient ice mummies, it only happened once before, and that's with Ötzi, the Austrian-Italian Iceman. And so it was it was all pretty new. And then the media buzz it was a media scrum for 2 weeks after it kind of came out that this ancient person was discovered. And we were on the front page of one of the two national newspapers in Canada, and it's called the National Post. The other is the Globe and Mail. We were on the front page of the National Post. That's
August 23, 1999?
This is August 23rd, yeah.
23rd, yeah.
August 25th, sorry, 1999, when it actually hit the newspaper.
Yeah.
And it was quite a media. We were getting phone calls from BBC London, England,
right?
The Chicago Tribune, New York Times, Time Magazine, Der Spiegel, which is a big German news magazine,
for sure.
Paris Match, which is a big French news magazine,
right? Because they had followed the Iceman as well. Ötzi.
Yes, exactly,
right.
Ötzi. And so now there's a North American version.
Right.
So the speculation is he's 1,000 years old, he's 10,000 years old. I mean, it's just the media can take things and just explode.
And so is that you with the rifle?
That's me with a rifle on the front page of the National Post.
Right. In the story last night, you were going this is the first time anybody's positively been portrayed with a rifle.
With a rifle on the front page of a newspaper, and they weren't in prison.
That's a great. I love that idea. But that's an incredibly cool picture.
Yeah. It was the one that when I first climbed up on the ice, and Mike and Warren said, "What is it? What is it? We'll take your picture." And they took that picture from the bottom, and from looking up at the ice. And then again, Mike and Warren seem to have all the local newspapers, like from Vancouver, and the TV stations from Vancouver and Calgary and stuff like that. Yeah. But I seem to field all the international calls because it was on the front page of the national newspaper. Yeah. So I was getting the international calls; they were getting the local calls. But it was a 2-week media scrum over the whole thing, and we had no answers, of course. But Glacier yields
that's the nature of reporters, man.
Yeah, Glacier yields body of ancient hunter. Scientists put face on BC's ancient hunter. Nelson teachers discover prehistoric hunter.
Which is kind of ironic because one thing missing was his head, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So when they went back and they recovered the remains, part of his right arm was missing, his lower left leg, and was missing his head. So it was a partial remains. It wasn't a complete body. Yeah. So it was treated as remains, not as a person. It was a complete. But one of the most significant things about the discovery was that it was a person going about his everyday business when he perished. It wasn't a ritualized burial. He wasn't prepared. Somebody didn't prepare him for burial and put him with tools he might normally not use. Yeah. He's traveling along on the landscape with the tools of the day that he needed to survive on that, in that environment. So a glimpse into ancient life, and again, pictures of the hat and the robe and the artifacts, and find of a lifetime. And it was quite a media scrum for a while there.
So when did y'all know at that time what the sticks were you'd found? They didn't know what they were.
No, and they didn't know either. They knew that they were and they were still yet to determine if they belonged to Tatshenshini or not. Because as they found all these different artifacts, some carbon dated more recent, some carbon dated later, some carbon dated at the same time that they that he was there. Yeah. So there was a lot of science that they had to prove out. Again,
and did they have an idea of how old he was?
At the time, it took until it was almost a year and a half later, because again, the carbon dating of the time, there's quite when anything that's associated with a marine environment, and they started to feel that he might have been. The carbon dates are very skewed because the ocean is a carbon sink. Yeah. And so you catch a fish in the ocean today, it'll date 300 years old. You just caught it. So, I mean, why? So there's a very...
I didn't know that.
There's a very complicated mathematical, sequence of formulas to try to determine at least plus minus date. Okay. So the first dates that came out, he was actually 1,000 years old. Mm-hmm. But again, that wasn't published. Mm-hmm. Again, they had to refine it a little further, and their biggest challenge not only was the carbon dating, or the marine effect it's called, but the fact that they couldn't destroy any of his body, parts or anything like that, and any of his flesh or bone matter for that. And so they had to only carbon date his belongings, so the spruce root hat and the robe and some of the sticks. And again, to carbon date a wooden object, it was a wooden object made from an old tree.
Right.
a 200-year-old tree or
Right.
from a 5-year-old sapling.
Right. Gotcha.
So again, that could skew, and so it was very complicated. So when the dates finally came out in the early 2000s, it carbon dated between 1400 and 1450.
Okay.
So 550 years ago, predates Christopher Columbus, 1492.
Yeah.
And so very significant in terms of zero influence from European culture. I don't even think there wasn't even the otter trade. There wasn't even the spar tree trade up the from the old Spanish and British and French navies up the coast of British Columbia, getting the big spar trees for their huge warships.
Right.
There wasn't any trade with Asian culture at all or European culture at all. So it was they figured that they had a window in time of someone that was completely pre-European contact.
Right.
So it was pretty exciting in that regard. But again, only a partial discovery. It was just remains.
Yeah.
Remains. So all this is going on, and there's lecture series, and we were invited to Victoria, University of Victoria, and the Royal BC Museum held a lecture series in 2001, and we were invited down, and we were one of the first presenters after the Champagne and Asiatic First Nations and the local First Nations welcomed us to their traditional territory, and the scientists spoke and kind of laid out the plan for the evening. First up was I was volunteered by Mike and Warren to be the spokesperson for our group to give this presentation to 1,000 people in the auditorium in the University of Victoria, a lecture theater. So, and again, walking in with a slide carousel with a series of slides that were censored, of course, to make sure there was no pictures of remains shown or anything like that. And we only had the one was the pelvis. That's the only picture we had because we hadn't been back. And again, so click, 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 and up on the screen, and then click, 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 and up on the screen. And so I was able to tell our story of the discovery. That's our own total involvement up until that point in 2001. So then the years are going by and things are getting quiet. All the scientists go back into different, parts of the world to do their research and stuff like that. And there's different things going on. And then about 4 years later, in about 2003, Mike and I decided Warren didn't want to hunt was tied up that summer or something. But Mike and I said, well, let's apply for Dall sheep tags again. For two reasons. We're just getting into the good stuff. And secondly, we want to put closure to this discovery. We just go back, say our last respects, because in 2001, one of the conditions were that the Champagne and Asiatic First Nation got the remains back. They had a traditional ceremony. They cremated the remains, and the same people that took them off the ice put them back on the ice. Okay. And then they had a rock cairn, and the urn was put inside the cairn, and so they had a ceremony up on the discovery site, and they put Kwari Tatshenshini back to where he came from. So all that went on, and then it was pretty quiet. So in 2003, Mike and I threw our names in the hat again for limited entry hunt in the Tatshenshini, and lo and behold, we draw tags. It took us 6 years the first time, and the second time we tried, we drew the first time. So now we got a group hunt for two of us. And so again, we know that the best weather is going to be those middle 2 weeks of August. So I think August the 7th, we jump in the car and the truck, and 3,000 kilometers, 2,000 miles later, we're on the banks of the Tatshenshini. On our way through Whitehorse, we stopped to see Greg Hare. And just to catch up, hey Greg, what's going on? We kept in touch with Greg, and we were involved in in all the research and discovery or anything that correspondence that they had. We were invited to participate on the project team, which we did. Yeah. And because where'd you find that first stick? Show us here on the map, and then show us the next stick, so they can kind of like the forensic science that went into all the discovery. Yeah. So we were involved with everything and had that respect and had that that trust and everything that we had been able to begin right on the ice surface that very day of the discovery. But then everything fizzled. We never heard a thing for the longest time. So we stopped to see Greg and say, "Hey Greg, what's happening?" And he kind of said, "Well, scientists have gone their own directions, and there's been some cultural issues that the First Nations are trying to work out, and we said, well, who's putting together like all the compilation of all the research and all these things that are going on, the glaciology and the artifacts and the pollen dating and the DNA study and the list is endless. And he says, well, right now there's no story. He says, there's no story. He says, well, there's no head, there's no story. Uh-huh. He says it was only partial remains. Right. And we just kind of
had they already done the pollen dating and stuff like that?
They had already done the pollen dating.
Okay, so tell me a little bit before we go back. Tell me a little bit of what that was like.
Pollen dating is they actually wash the robe, wash the pollen out of the robe, and then by studying the pollen, the pores and the spores and the pollen and everything, they can determine which plants were in bloom, the time of year, and that indicated a timeline for when he was actually in that neck of the woods. They were also doing a study of the elementary
when
canal.
It was?
Mid-August, same time we were there. He was
time.
there in the same time of year we were there.
Okay.
I'm sure the time to travel through glaciers is a very short period. Particularly at this time, still 500 years ago, it was a mini ice age. They call it the little ice age, and ice was accumulating.
Yeah.
So there was even probably a smaller window to get through these glacier fields. So the pollen dating indicated he was traveling through that country in August because the plants that were the pollen that they found on him was indicating it was a summertime.
Right.
And they were doing a study of his alimentary canal. So the contents in his alimentary canal, and they called it the chime. And this
was a great new word to me.
They could put a timeline together of not only the time of year he was there, but the last 5 days of his life. And they indicated that he by this time they're starting to the clues are starting to show that he's a coastal Indian, that they figure he's a Tlingit Indian. Yeah. And that he was a young man. He was 19, 20 years old. He was 5'8". He was perfect health. They don't know how he perished on the ice or why he perished on the ice, but there was zero pre-death trauma. There was zero post-mortem decay. He was buried and frozen immediately, or frozen and buried immediately. Mm-hmm. So they figure he got caught in a midsummer storm. He got hypothermia out on the ice surface, or something happened, but he wasn't injured in any way that they could tell. And
so tell me about the chime. The chime.
So there was a forensic botanist at the University of Glasgow named Dr. Jim Dixon, and he wrote a book called Ancient Glacier Mummies, and he was the only scientist in the world working on both Ötzi, the Austrian-Italian Iceman, and Tatshenshini. Okay. And anyways, he wrote a book, and it was about 3/4 Ötzi, because that's how much science there was on Ötzi, right, and about 1/4 on Tatshenshini. But because he used the same techniques into reading the stomach contents and finding different things like lichens. There were 7 different kind of lichens or mosses in Tatshenshini's system, and there's no culture on Earth that eats lichen or moss for that matter. Okay. It's not. So it was consumed incidentally, either on a fish or on his hands or whatever he was eating, or drinking water or whatever. It was consumed incidentally, but they're very elevation specific, these lichens and mosses. So he was able to determine that from this moss was coastal, this moss was kind of subalpine, this moss was alpine, this moss was glacial, and the minerals that went along with these mosses and the other clues that were in his body. So they got a timeline of the last week of his life as well. So the science that we call it CSI Tatshenshini. Yeah, he had what? CSI. Yeah, Tatshenshini. Right, sure. Yeah, crime scene investigation. Tatshenshini. Right. And he actually was carrying a smoked sockeye salmon. Okay. And they know it was a 4-year-old sockeye salmon, and it was caught in a freshwater stream by the abrasions on the scales. Mm-hmm. So we're talking 500-year-old fish scales. They could tell have been abraded by rocks in a freshwater stream, because there's no abrasions in the ocean. Right. Anyways, it's the science is amazing, and I walk through some of the different. There it is, right there. So there's the. They call it chum, but then they identified it further on as the science evolved. Yeah. It's actually a sockeye salmon. And there's the scales right there. Yeah. 4 years growth. And then they could tell by the abrasions on those scales under the microscope, of course. Right. And I show slides of this, and so I talk through a bit of the science. And
so they knew that he was, at one point, they knew that he was coming from a marine environment, right?
They knew he was coming from a marine environment by the basic isotopes in his biomolecular structure, in his growth, in his bone marrow, and his blood cells, indicated that he was raised on marine protein. And yet he had the most recent 3-month growth of his hair indicated he was eating a terrestrial diet. Basic isotopes in his hair indicated he was eating a terrestrial diet. So the theory is that he grew up on the coast. He traveled inland for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. He returned to the coast. He resupplied, and he was 50 miles inland when he perished, because he had a stomach full of seafood. He had sea asparagus, he had crustaceans, he had seal or whale blubber in his stomach, and he had these pollens and lichens and stuff like that, indicating he was at that environment very recently. Yeah. Yet he was in this glacial environment when he perished. So they backtrack all these clues and the route that they figured he took from the coast to get to this place. And I'll mention later on that these were big tidewater glaciers that they actually 50 miles long, but they would tow off into the ocean back in the Little Ice Age, and that they would travel up these ice highways because they were such easy traveling.
Yeah,
such easy traveling. Here's there's something called taphonomy and how things dissipate into the environment from wind and rain and meltwater channels and predation and all the other things that happen when something dies in the wilderness.
The word is
taphonomy.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so this one slide is a cross section of the glacier where they found the torso and the robe, the pelvis and the legs, the ice edge where Warren was standing, the right hand bones, the hair masses, and the meltwater channel. And they're trying to determine how he came apart. Yeah, and where the missing parts might be.
Gotcha.
Through science kind of stuff, even before the ice melted, so they would hopefully be able to find something. So there's the man tool, they called it. At the first, they called it a tugwat. Tugwat, tugwat. But that name had never been used again after the first year, and now it's called just a man tool. And again, it was designed to skin marmots and ground squirrels.
Does it have stone in it? Or is it just sharpened wood?
There's an actual metal tip in it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's an actual metal tip in it. And again, as the science is developing, where would he get metal that time? It was either meteoric or it was on floats. It would float up on, like on a board on the from Asia kind of stuff, and they'd recover a nail from it or something. Yeah. But they didn't want to just take it apart and see. It was so corroded. They didn't want to take it apart and look at it because it would have destroyed the artifact.
What was the hide that bound all that together?
It was like a moose hide thong, like a leather lace, a moose hide thong, and it on a hemlock handle, and it was all greasy and oily from use. And it was a beaver hide case. So the sheath was made out of beaver hide. Yeah. But as technology advanced, like in the early 2000s, I think it was called an X-radiograph, and it's they can laser point something, and it'll tell what element it is. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have to take it apart, and they can tell every element within that man tool, from the hemlock handle to the moose hide thong to there was a little. This here is like a wedge of rolled up hide that they'd wedge in there to hold that blade firm.
Wow, yeah, you go.
So something that wedged in there and it would swell with moisture and it would cause it to tighten up like an axe handle kind of stuff. It's going to swell and keep that head on. So the technology is advanced. Exactly.
And there's the spruce hat all
dried out and curated. And they could tell under the microscope that there was red ochre patterning on it. Yeah. But again, it probably bleached out over the decades. And then again, it was like a puzzle piece trying to put this robe back together again to indicate, to show the different parts and pieces and the little stitches and the moose hide collar and the reinforced shoulder pads, and the little tiny stitches, and the greased and red ochred seams. Gotcha. And again, the fish they found with him. Yeah. And so it was quite a.
Well, that can bring us to going to the sheep hunt.
So so back to the sheep hunt again. So we drew tags first and foremost back again to the very first try we did in 2003, and so Mike and I planned to be in Whitehorse, sitting there at the table with Greg Hare, and basically said no head, no story. It kind of depressed us a little bit, but we wanted to head back into that incredible sheep habitat, carry on where we left off after the discovery in 1999 and pay our last respects because he had been cremated. His ashes had been put back on the glacier. So again, it would put closure for us to the whole discovery. And because it was, again, life-changing, but for a very short time, for only 4 years. So here we are again, the banks of the Tatshenshini River, and we backpack in. We got to cross the river, and again, you're not sure what you're going to get to. What are the river levels like? What are the weather's been? Has it been raining? Has it been hot? That doesn't make a difference anymore because the rain's going to bring the river up and the melting warm water or the warm temperature is going to bring the water up. So it's a crapshoot. You want to be able to get across that river. It's actually higher than it was in 1999. Okay. 1999 was the hottest year on record in BC, and 2003 was the next hottest year, was then the hottest year on record. Okay. So we picked 2 very warm summers to go. So we start highballing in. You can see by the clarity of the pictures, we've gone to digital cameras by this time. Yeah. So as the old film cameras, now we got unlimited electrons.
It's getting a lot greener and a lot whiter.
A lot greener, a lot whiter, a lot more brilliant. All the pictures bristle. Yeah, here we are trying to get out of the wind and trying to cook up some soup for lunch and warm up a little bit. Little overcast sky, but again, if it's not pouring rain, you're hunting. Yeah. And again, get up high. And we wanted to kind of take a look at a few other nooks and crannies that we missed in 1999 because we had been distracted. And again, huge green, spectacular sheep basins that are just over the top in terms of quality of habitat. And these little spring freshets, see, there's the O'Connor River, and it's just a raging torrent where it flows into the Tatshenshini. It's just an absolute a glacial till runoff.
Yeah.
These little streams.
Can you drink that water, or does it make you sick?
No, you can. You don't want to drink the main river waters because of beaver fever or whatever other bacteria.
But will that glacier silt hurt you at all?
No.
Gotcha. No.
But we'll find a little spring or a little stream that's coming out that's not coming out of a snowfield, that's maybe bubbling out of the grounds because it's crystal clear.
Right.
Whereas these freshets here, you're
carrying a lot of rock.
You're carrying a lot of sand. You got a water bottle full of sand if you fill up here.
Yeah.
And in the morning you can jump across these streams, but in the afternoon it's dangerous. So you got to look around to find a place, or you're taking your boots on, putting your Crocs on, wandering across, getting soaking wet, drying off, put your boots on every time you got to cross the creek because they become big creeks in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So we start heading towards the site, and again, because it's 35 miles in, we got a long way to go, but we know where we're going. We're glassing on our way in, but we want to get into the kind of the best habitat. And so about the fourth day of our hunt, we're starting to get close to the site, and we're going to go up to the same route we took to get there in 1999. And it's a foggy, rainy, almost snowy day. It's about 0 degrees, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it's one of those hypothermia type of days. Probably the kind of day that Tatshenshini would have been there in a gopher skin robe and a woven spruce root hat, and it just wasn't enough technology.
It didn't work out.
It did not work out. We were, of course, in high-tech Gore-Tex and Peter Storm rain gear and Gore-Tex hiking boots, and we had all the, Gore-Tex downfill sleeping bags and, and jet boils, or not jet boils, but we had, kind of
good stoves.
Lightweight backpacking stoves for the day, and anyways, we came across this rock wall, like a hunting blind of sorts. So we checked it out. We thought, well, we never saw this in 1999, and we thought it could have been a hunting blind, a First Nation hunting blind kind of thing. Turned out to be probably another sheep hunter got in this windy place and had to build a bit of a barrier to keep his tent from blowing off the mountain, or a surveyor that was doing mineral surveys in there, 30 years ago kind of stuff, Again, so then we get ourselves up into up to the site where the cairn is, and we didn't know where the cairn was. We had an idea where it was, and we're where
they had put the ashes.
Where they put the ashes, and we're kind of wandering around the fog because it's that kind of day you can't see 50 feet in front of you. And anyways, we came to the cairn. There are a few gifts that were left there by the First Nations for Tatshenshini. We said our last respects. We said a few, we said our piece, and we started heading into that basin. We couldn't see it because we were fogged right in completely. But as the day warmed up, the weather started to lift a little bit, so we got a little bit of it started to clear up, so we could see into the basin, and we could tell that the whole ice patch had changed immensely. We're talking 20 feet of ice had melted. The big Nunatak Islands, the big rock islands out in this ice patch were connected now. There were great big seas of rock. And that whole wall of ice was leveled now. We were looking down on it as opposed to up 20 feet in the air.
This is only 4 years?
This is 4 years later.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So we're walking along, and kind of same kind of thing. Hey, Mike, you want to skate right across that ice patch again? It'll save us a lot of miles, and I'm ribbing them by this time. And, no, let's walk the same route. Maybe we'll find more artifacts. So we start walking down the ice, and we're talking, and it's really, the edge of the ice is, we want to kind of stay on the ice because the edges, it's a mumbled melting of mud and ice and snow and everything, and you're sinking up to your knees in mud, and so you kind of stay on the ice, but on the edge of it.
Yeah.
And Mike, where was the original discovery site? And I said, right here, Mike. You can see there's that Nunatak, and right here. We're looking right down on it. Then we walked a little further down the ice.
Was the moose gone too?
The moose is further down the ice in the first place, so we can't see it yet.
Yeah,
we're talking about that. Let's see how far down the ice the moose has slid. So we're walking a little further, and there's a little bit of a berm of snow and ice. And I step up on this berm, and I look over, and I said, "Hey, Mike, look ahead." And he swears at me. And you're freaking me out. He says, the hair's standing on the back of my neck again. You remember it was in 1999? I said, Mike, it's because the head's right here on the ice surface. And I wasn't joking. 4 years later, The ice had melted so much, even though the First Nations and the scientists had been there every summer doing research and collecting more artifacts as they melt out of the ice. We found the rest of the remains. So 4
it's
years
almost
later,
y'all were the ones meant to.
We were, and
you feel that way,
and that's what it proved out to be. Hal, is that we were chosen to find him.
It's wild.
We just didn't. It wasn't a series of coincidences or happenstance. Like I said, we were meant to find him. And when we missed some of them, he said, "Hello, excuse me, you created a bit of a issue here.
Right?
Can you please finish your job?
Can you please apply for another sheep tag now?
Can you guys? Yeah, exactly. So again, the things that happened didn't happen by coincidence.
That's amazing.
They meant to happen. So here we are. There's the skull is on the ice surface. The teeth. You can see parts and pieces of the what's called the your temporal bones. So those they look like big cauliflowers.
Yeah,
and that's what that is right there.
Gotcha.
And then you could tell, like they could say, you could tell he was a young man because the skull was all fractured at the sutures, like at all the various plate joining locations, the sutures, it was all separated. So there's like 4 or 5 pieces of the skull that had come apart.
You can also see he has really good teeth.
Yes, and again, they could glean a lot of information from the teeth and how worn they are, for how much he used them for various things. Yeah. And again, moose hide collar, some more parts of the robe were there. The actual part of the right arm that was missing, the scapula and the upper arm was there as well as more small bones and those kind of things. So so we took a few pictures. We didn't disturb anything. We left everything as we found it. And because it was we were in such a spectacular place, and we're used to finding human remains, kind of ancient bodies. We just went hunting.
I've done this before.
We've done this before. We know who to phone now. This is like, we know the protocol. We know what to do. So again, we were excited about it, but the fog lifted, and we looked into the basin. And again, being in the hunting moment, we looked into the basin, and there's 50 sheep in the basin. I mean, it is loaded with sheep. And so we sit down, we got a window in the weather, we pull out the spotting scope, and we start looking, and there's 43 ewes and lambs, and there's 7 rams. And in the middle of the 7 rams, there's one nice big full curl ram. So so now we're excited. We got we got a big full curl ram in the mountain. We got all day there. The weather is starting to smarten up a little bit, but the problem is we're in this huge wide open. These are all sheep here.
Oh yeah.
And we're pinned down.
Right.
We can't move anywhere.
Right.
We're stuck.
What other predators are in there?
Wolves. We saw wolves each time. We saw grizzly bears, enormous grizzly bears, foxes as well.
So the sheep are always on guard.
They're always on guard. Yeah. There's golden eagles as well that prey on the sheep, and bald eagals and everything else. But all the main predators are in there. I don't think there's any mountain lions that far north. I'm not sure, but not in this country.
They wouldn't have much element of surprise in there.
No, they wouldn't. So. Anyways,
holy smokes, that's a nice ram.
I showed you a slide too soon. I jumped ahead too soon. So anyways, we crawl into this basin, and now we're pinned down. There's so many sheep around us. They still spook on sight of humans, of course. They have been hunted for centuries. Yeah. And so we're pinned down, and by this time it's only about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we can't move. We're trying to glass. We're watching the rams are starting to feed and move now, and they're heading towards this rock band. Then we see down the valley this weather system moving in. And we're thinking, wow, when this weather system hits us, it's going to block out this basin, and we can make a play on these rams. So we wait till this weather system. We got our rain gear on again. I actually turned mine inside out because the inside was white. So in case the weather lifted when I was halfway on my stalk, I'd be white, looking like a white sheep. Which is one trick to get closer to rams. You pretend you're a sheep and you're wearing white. So anyways, I start crawling. So this weather system blows in, and it's raining and not snowing, but just this heavy misty fog is blown in on us. So we're now completely hidden by the fog. Yeah. And I'm heading towards this rock band where we last saw these rams. And Mike's hunkered down. So I start making this play up this long grassy basin. And I'd go a few hundred yards, and I'd stop, and I'd get my binoculars out, and I'm kind of looking through the fog to see if I can see something. And I do this about 4 or 5 times as I'm getting into this basin. And it's an enormous basin. I mean, it's a mile long up this, and it gets steeper and steeper up to this rock band. And so I go another couple hundred yards, and I get down, and I'm looking. I'm waiting for all of a sudden the fog to lift, and I do this about 4 or 5 times. And so I'm getting up the mountain quite a ways, and I can start to see this rock band. So I'm going, okay, I'm getting close. If these rams are still here, they're going to be close. Yeah. And then as I'm looking at this rock band, there's kind of a wisp of fog, and it's like an apparition. And I see one sheep, and it's this full crow ram. And if you judge enough sheep, you can tell the character of the sheep. You know exactly which ram you're looking at. There wasn't a close one. There wasn't a second. There wasn't a couple rams. There was one really nice ram. So I'm thinking, oh, is that him? Is that him? It's the only thing I'm scanning, and the fog just wisped around where he was. So I hunker down. I mean, I safety off, and I'm ready. And then the fog lifts, and he's only 100 yards away. And I see one sheep, and it's this full crow ram, and I shoot it. It falls. The fog lifts. I had ran up a horse. When the fog lifted, there's 49 sheep all around me like this in a horseshoe shape. I ran right up the center of them, and in the center was this full crow ram.
Wow.
And I shot that ram, and when the fog lifted, all these sheep are standing there looking at me, and I'm looking at them going, sorry, guys. So, I mean, just the story of that hunt itself, the spirit of Kwali Tatshenshini was very strong in that basin.
Yeah.
And I feel that was our reward for
doing the right thing.
Doing the right thing from the beginning, and then completing the job and finding the rest of them 4 years later, so that he could put not only him at peace, but his community at peace. At least that's how we feel about it, right? And so again, but to be able to have that kind of hunting experience, and when those things happen, that there's something really
something beyond the fabric that you can touch.
Exactly. And we're so removed from the rhythm of the land that it might have been something more tangible 500 years ago, but today, because we're so dulled from our,
I got to tell you, Bill, I believe in that completely.
Yeah.
In that we have law. I don't know about law. We definitely have. There were other realities at other times. And I'm sure of that. I mean, it makes sense to me on a practical level, right?
Yeah. And you start to feel that the deeper you get into wilderness, and the more you slow down and shed all your, influences of civilization, and you get out there and in more. And as hunters, we realize that a little sooner than I think, because we are trying to. We know the weather, or we're trying to predict the weather, and we know thermals, and we know habits of wildlife, and we flora and fauna and all that stuff. But again, when that ecology of deep wild, and I'll talk about that a little further in the next sequel. But again, there's something out there. I think John Turk calls it, is it magic or is it logic? Right. And that's why we'll sequel into John Turk pretty soon too.
Or is it both? I mean, it's so I have a friend who what's the word you use for how things scatter on the landscape?
Taphonomy.
Taphonomy. Well, he's a miner. He's a diamond seeker, and gold miner, all those things, small scale, very very obsessed. Yeah. And he spent his whole life with sort of the taphonomy of rock and minerals and stuff like that. And he has a famous, it's not famous for anybody but me, but he just said, people talk to me about supernatural, because he works in places where there's curses and whatnot, like in India. Yeah. And he said, I don't know about all that. He said, it's all natural processes. It seems supernatural to people who don't understand it, or haven't ever thought about it, or have lost the ability to see it.
Yeah.
He said, but he said there's no doubt to me that the supernatural is real, but it's not. It's just natural.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. This story is particularly
this particular hunt, after finding the remainder, the rest of the remains, and making them a complete person, and that was the most significant thing for the First Nations, is that it went from a partial remains to a complete person.
Gotcha.
So that really had a profound effect on how everything was treated after that. But we went on to kill this beautiful stone or Dall ram, Dall ram. And again, my rain gear's turned inside out for white, and again the discovery sites in the background there.
The photos of the ram.
Yeah. And again, there's Mike, and the weather blew back in again. We had an all-night, that's 11 o'clock at night, We had an all-night shin tangle, side hill gouging, creek crossing, bushwhacking, cold, rainy, almost snow. Our headlamps are getting dull. Yeah. I mean, you're in the zone, and your partner is, how you doing? Good. You?
Yeah,
good. There ain't no weak link. You gotta. I mean, one slip, one fall, you're done. Yeah. And so you have to really be. You're running on adrenaline. Yeah. But you're controlling that adrenaline to control your energy level, and you got to eat to stay warm.
Right.
And you have to have everything about you.
Otherwise, your fate becomes the same fate of
otherwise, hopefully someone 500 200 years later is going to find you hunting country still wild, you know?
Right. They go, man, look at this weird hat.
Yeah, exactly. What's that say? Cabela? What's that? Yeah. So here's again. The next day is always you get back. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. We roll back into camp. We're in the next basin over. We don't want to go through that ice in the dark, all that mud and torn. You know, I mean, it's just been the landscape's been mined. So we're going to go the long way around the mountain because it's natural.
Mined by the old glaciers.
Mined by the old glaciers. Yeah, I mean, it's just melting, and you're trying to do all that in the dark with a heavy load on your back. You know. But then, I mean, here's our sheep's kebabs there over the fire. We had enough down in the river bottom.
You found
some willows
and stuff,
and they don't burn very long, but they burn enough to cook some meat up. Yeah. But with a ram head in camp, and again, you're in the moment kind of thing. You know, you're not tired, but you're tired, but you're, you know. Hunts like this, you sleep as little as ever. Yeah. You walk further with heavier loads. You eat as little as ever. Yeah. But you just feel, just as best you ever feel, kind of stuff. You know, right. you're basically, bristling with energy. Yeah. You know, so the next day is just more of a, camp day, cape out the horns and prep the skull and do all the meat chores and all that kind of stuff. We basically butcher in the backcountry. So we're not packing tendons and fat and anything that's non-edible, no bones. Everything's left back there except for the edible portions. Yeah. All the meat is basically butchered on the spot. So then we're still a couple days. We got some country we want to hunt, and again with heavy loads on our back, we're going to hunt our way back to the truck. We still got another 3 or 4 days, so we've got food plus extra. Now we got lots of meat, anyways. Yeah. But this is called the Drop of Doom. This picture here, we got to come out of this basin to come back up onto the main valley that we head towards the highway. Yeah. But like I mentioned last night, this is one of my favorite hunting pictures, and I'm gonna go to my.
You know how much loss and gain is in that? It's like you gotta climb that hill and drop back down.
Goodness.
You're going to basin to basin.
Basin to basin or drainage to drainage.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going over kind of a high mountain pass to get into the next drainage. So we got to go up one times. And so I'll read my notes here, but memories like this photo are priceless. So this is one of my favorite hunting photos. When you hunt this way, you sleep less than usual, eat less than usual, work harder than usual. You endure weather and heavy packs. All this, but you have never felt better. I think Theodore Roosevelt said it best in what he called the doctrine of the strenuous life. Skill and patience and the capacity to endure fatigue and exposure must be shown by the successful hunter, the kind of experience that comes from wilderness hunting. And to quote another great conservationist, Jim Posewitz, this kind of hunting addresses the balance between the hunter and the hunted, also known as the arduous pursuit.
Nice.
So I try not to use my notes when I'm on stage, but sometimes I have to, and it depends on the audience.
I'm super glad you had that in there, buddy.
And I always try to, we like to use Leopold Roosevelt Posewitz now because he's our modern day Rooseveltian creature. Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, now it's the we're the Posewitzians.
We're the Posewitzians, exactly.
I definitely I consider myself straight from that line. Like he's who I learned from. Yep. He distilled it down. And then, like we were talking about, he is so happy, and he's so funny, Yeah.
And positive,
positive all the time, and none of this environmental doom at all. He's busy, but it's a Posewitzian deal, and I embrace it wholeheartedly.
Yes, me too, Hal. Yeah. And so, Tim Brass at the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers put this meme together for me, and again, it's that picture. We're climbing out of the Drop of Doom. We got a heavy load on our back with a big Fulco ram. The discovery site is in the background. I'm leaning on kind of a broken stick I found, not an artifact, but a broken stick that actually was a walking stick that Warren left there in 1999. We found Warren's artifact. Right on. So I used it. We didn't have trekking poles back then. Yeah. We not a thought of them. We had a gun in one hand and off we went. And anyway, so probably one of the the most significant thing that was said to us after both discoveries and being involved and the respect that we showed and everything was that Tlingit Elder at one of the lecture series pulled us aside and said that you and your hunting partner found Tatshenshini because you're hunters of right heart and spirit. So that to us, put it in perspective on how we conduct ourselves on the land, how we conduct ourselves when we're hunting, how we conduct ourselves in the public eye. Like I'm able to talk about, I'm not hiding that this is why we were on the landscape. We were hunting.
Yeah.
And this is as a result of that hunting. And this is as a result of that land ethic and that hunting ethic that we have that came from the likes of Leopold and Pausewitz and David Peterson and Rick Bass and all these authors we talked about, and Ben Long. And that over the years that they created this conservation ethic. And then that's how we conduct ourselves when we're hunting.
Right.
And and when we're fighting for conservation and fighting for these wild places that have made the backcountry hunters and anglers such a fast-growing conservation organization today. And
I would go one step further on that, to go back to that, the idea of that hunt in that basin, in that when you're in right heart and spirit, perhaps you got the chance to meet somebody from 550 years ago or more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who was also traveling and hunting of right heart and spirit.
That's
right. What a possibility,
Exactly. And there's different,
going through time.
Yeah, and that's there's many speculations, and they're just speculations on how he perished, why he was there, and how he perished on the ice. And one is that the romantic theory that he had traveled from the coast inland, he'd met someone, he went back to the coast to get gifts for the family, and he was heading back inland when he perished. Another theory is that he was an ancient messenger, ancient email. The one chief from one band gave him a note and said, "Bring this to so-and-so chief, we want to trade," and then you bring the note back, and then he was bringing the note back, and these young, fit, the teenager, 20-year-olds that were running across the landscape with very light tools that they could travel fast. And that's another theory. And my theory, of course, is the sheep hunter theory. He was the first sheep hunter. He was in the best of the best sheep habitat. And that's why we connected so well, was we were there for the same reasons he was there.
Right. And one thing you were talking about last night that we missed, the stuff y'all found was a salmon gaff, right?
It was a 13-foot salmon gaffing tool, or a fishing tool.
Gotcha.
And it was, the Tlingit Indians were known to travel with those, and they would use them for balance.
Yeah.
If they're crossing streams or ices or ridges or something like that, they would use them.
Crevasse, too.
Yeah, crevasse for that matter. They use them for defense. They would use them, of course, to catch fish. They'd use them as a lean-to, and they'd drape something over top for shelter. I mean, so they were a multi-purpose tool, not just for catching fish.
Yeah.
But again, that was their main thing, that they would gaff their fish.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's our. And again, the meme says, I joined backcountry hunters and anglers because they're hunters of right heart and spirit.
Right.
And like Ben said today, he says, and which we hear the most when we go to these rendezvous. I finally found people that I get it. They get it with me. That I can talk to, and we.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing worse going into a meeting with other conservationists and you having to argue for conservation.
Right.
That's something that I've always struggled with, and I haven't had to argue yet with the backcountry hunters and anglers, other than what caliber is best.
Right, sure. Oh,
what broadhead?
What are y'all hunting? What do y'all shoot for those sheep?
Oh, I built my own custom sheep rifle back in 1993. It was a Wildcat cartridge. Again, I'm a 6.5 caliber fan, or a 264 caliber.
Yep.
I didn't want the heavy recoil in Magnum, so I built what's called a 6.5-06.
Yeah.
So I take a 30-06 case and I neck it down to 264.
Gotcha.
So I get a very light recoil, 140 grain bullet traveling about 3,000 feet per second. So it's very flat shooting, no recoil. I mean, most of my kids all shot all their first deer with it. It's kid friendly.
Wow.
Again, I can shoot steep. I can shoot and not worry about recoil or scope eye or anything like that. So it's done me well.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was wondering about that when I saw y'all's rifles getting out of the truck in that picture.
Yeah, and it was. Brown Precision Kevlar stock, bought it back in 92, and it would look like, it showed up in the mail, looked like an alligator hide. And you got to use Bondo and fix it all up and spray paint and kind of, it was the first I built my own mountain rifles before mountain rifles became
Were a thing.
Right, everybody makes a mountain rifle now. I got to build one of those.
Right. That was cool a long time ago, man.
That was cool a long time ago. And again, still a fixed 6-power scope on it. Like I don't
that's what I shoot
fiddle
too.
Around. And it's just
it's interesting. You're a minority in that. That's what my kids and I we have these fixed 6 powers.
Yeah, fixed. All my kids got fixed power scope on their rifles.
Well, then you can use them as a rangefinder too.
Exactly.
If you know what 24 inches looks like.
Yeah, if the first shot isn't on fur, you're too far.
Right.
If the first shot isn't on fur, you don't hold over. Your first shot's on fur, or get closer. That's always been our theory.
Gotcha.
And it's practice at the range. It's getting comfortable with your rifle and that one caliber, and knowing what it does in what conditions. And
Yeah. Well, so what do y'all have got you got one trip back, right? And this is where you get to John Turk. And
yeah. Well, let me go. I'll
keep
start
going.
talking faster.
Yeah.
I'll talk. We're my wife is shopping, so I'm hoping that she's
we're
still
okay, man. Yeah.
So now we're coming out of the Tatshenshini, and again, it's a long hike, but we got a load of. When you got a sheep on your back, it doesn't matter. You're again, it's. Those hard, heavy miles are just what just makes it so much more rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an achievement. It's not something for nothing. It's an actual achievement.
Right.
It's like, and I always like to quote David Peterson: "Is what you want from the hunt, larger shapes, where and how you hunt." So we want to hunt wilderness settings. We want pure wilderness hunting. We want distance. We want effort. We want ethics. So it's we're all in, or we're not going hunting. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so this is the where and the why where we hunt. So then we're going to zip into 2005, and Dr. Jim Dixon, he's a professor of archaeobotany and plant systematics at the University of Glasgow in Glasgow, Scotland.
Okay.
And he asked me to guide him into the Tatshenshini. Dr. Dixon is studying the contents of the alimentary canal.
Okay.
So he's putting all the clues together. And so he hired me or asked me to guide him into an expedition into the Tatshenshini that's funded by the Carnegie Trust of Scottish Universities and the Royal Geological Society.
Okay.
Royal London Geological Society. So it's a big deal. He's one of the most prolific botanists on the planet, actually, and one of the only two scientists working on both Utsi and Tatshenshini.
Okay.
So it was quite an adventure just to hang out with Jim. We got to see the curated artifacts at the archaeological branch in Whitehorse.
Is that the gaff?
This is the gaff. You're going to see how it's been all put together. There's the broken stick that Mike and I first found.
Yeah.
There's the hat again. It's the first time I actually got a chance to see the hat. Look at how tightly woven and perfectly those.
Yeah. I mean, last night I walked away from there, and that was the most impressive thing of all.
Yeah. See, here's all the gaffs starting to be put together now.
Yeah.
They're starting to curate them and put them all together.
Yeah.
This is Sheila Greer. She's an archaeologist that works for the Champagne and
It's
Asia.
one big, long...
13-foot. All those sticks all fit together, and they became one big, long salmon gaffing tool.
Yeah.
And you can see that where a gaff would have been laced on to these little barbs here that were on. The gaff wasn't there. It might have been an antler, it might have been a bone or something like that. But this is the first time I'd actually seen the knife. By this time in 2005 was sent away to have that X-radiograph and laser measured or whatever to tell what elements were in it. Here's Jim Dixon and Petra Moody. Petra is she was with Natural Resources Canada. She was another forensic botanist, again, but for the Natural Resources Canada. And again, some aerial photos of the country we were hunting. I mean, it's spectacular to be able to kind of see the route we were taking that we took in there. You know, we went up this valley here, across this valley here. That mine site was back there, and then the Samuel Glacier is back there. So to get into the country. And, with one of the park wardens at the Champagne and Asiac lived in Haines Junction. We were the pack mules. We packed all the gear. We packed big plant presses because
Were you able to fly in there with the helicopter?
We flew in with a helicopter on that trip, and then we spent 4 days at the site botanizing, and then we took 4 days to hike out to the highway. And Dr. Dixon was looking for certain clues he found in the stomach, certain bog mosses, and he used all the Latin terms and all the all the Latin names of this vegetation, but he was looking for bog moss, some particular species that the first time they'd ever been identified in the north. So that's another thing that, I mean, Dr. Dixon said that these kind of discoveries create a very intellectual challenge, and that's what his job was to unravel all these clues that he was given. Yeah. So we spent some more time. There's the site now. There's almost no ice. Wow. That was in 2005. So that was a wall ice, and that's the spot where the remains were discovered.
So we're facing a completely uncertain future.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think we are.
I've never, Bill, I got to tell you, so I see stuff on TV about this glacier falling off here or this. It's continual, right? Yeah. These pictures in this thing with somebody over 20 years, which is not an eyelash, not even a blink. Yeah. I mean, the change in that landscape in your pictures is incredibly dramatic. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so better get ready.
So so there's the site right there. Yeah, like that's where this person's standing is where we found the head in 2003. Yeah. So 2 years prior was still a surface of ice, and now there's none. And now there's none.
Sure.
We also found a canine up there. So now we found 3 things in that glacier: a human, a wolf. It turned out to be a wolf, but Tlinkits were known to travel with big dogs.
Yep.
Pack dogs and stuff like that. But it turned out they figured it was a wolf.
Okay.
And the moose. So there's 3 living things in that. It was a busy place.
Yeah.
It was a busy place.
Yeah.
And there's the moose just further, like the original picture.
He's traveled a long way.
He's just the skull cap just
working his way toward the sea
down there. Exactly. Exactly. And there's Dr. Dixon there, and again, botanized empty valley, and it's even receding. The ice is even receding more in there. And an interesting thing here, and I don't know the picture, is that I walked down there one day with Frances Olis, and Frances is this is Frances. She's a First Nation stone carver, so she carves, like she sees something in the rock and then she'll carve it. Yeah. And anyways, amazing artist. So we walked down there one day just to kind of take a look what Empty Valley, what was around the corner. And so she went one way, I went the other, and I sat down by these rocks down here, and it was about 2:00 in the afternoon. It was quite warm, and that's time for a snooze, right? So I sat down on a rock, and I undid my boots and loosened my boots off. And as I was undoing my boots, I looked down at a crack between the rocks, and there's something down there. So I reached down in the crack between the rocks, and I pulled out this birch bark scroll. Like we're talking, there's no birch trees within 50 miles of here. So here's a birch bark scroll that was probably someone's fire starter kit.
Yeah.
So we turned that in. It mentions that in the book. I'll talk about that a little later. But so here again, and you would have walked over it a million times, but because I sat there, what's reached down between the rocks, kind of up to my wrist, and pulled out this birch bark, and it turned out to be. They measured it, how many meters or how many feet of actual birch bark was rolled together.
Wow.
For and they figured it was a fire starting kit. Damn. Yeah, some tinder.
Does it ever make you stop for a second and ponder? Like you and I were talking this morning about being so busy, and you're really working those conservation advocacy stuff and like really important stuff, you know? I'm writing all the time. I'm traveling and I'm doing stories. I'm doing these podcasts. What is lost in busyness is that thing we're talking about, is those windows into different realities.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a reality of its own. I don't know. But the life we live right now in this society is so quick.
Yeah.
That there's no telling what's actually falling down through the cracks.
Exactly. I'm
afraid you're never going to see it. That we'll never know.
Yeah, I'm afraid to hit my mail button in the morning. Emails, just because our chapter is growing in British Columbia. I mean, we've tripled our membership this year alone. So I mean, we're mimicking what the national BHA is doing in terms of explosive growth, meteoric growth. So I'm getting emails from Vancouver Island and Prince George, and we're trying to launch a Yukon chapter, and so just to before I even get started on the day, there's just all this stuff coming at you, and so you're behind before you even get started in the day.
Right.
So everything I'm doing, I'm going, I only got half an hour to do this. I got to get this done, and I'm trying to install a window in a 100-year-old building, and you don't know what surprises you got there, and you're borrowing time, and it's all taken away from where we really want to be or what we're really fighting for. Is all this wild country and that time to get to slow down,
to ponder,
exactly.
Yeah, to observe,
to find birch bark scrolls in glacier fields.
Yeah.
So there's the team again. It was a nice, relaxing trip actually, and being such a long way back and having such a diverse crowd. I mean, Jim was 65 at the time. Petra was 65. Al was our photographer. He was 61, and then the rest of us were relatively young and able to travel but have to. We're traveling as a group, so we can't leave anybody behind.
Yeah.
And so this day we're about 6:00 in the evening, and we'd been traveling all day. We know we're going to pick up the next day, and Jim's still frustrated. He says, "Bill, you got to leave me some energy to botanize tonight. Now we got to start. We got to find a place to camp."
Yeah.
And so I'm going, okay, Jim. And I'm trying to manage the group, and people are getting tired, and we're running out of water, so we got to find water. And because we're starting to get down into the river bottom now, so it's all really glacial till and stuff like that. It's not the best, and a lot of beaver dams it's gone through, kind of country where the beavers are. So we're worried about giardia. So I said, okay, guys, dump your packs. I'm just going to run down the trail. I got an idea where there's a little meadow kind of stuff, and I know there's a stream coming off the mountain close by. We should be able to have some good water. And he says, and damn it, Bill, he says, I haven't found bog moss yet. I got to find bog moss. And he's been the whole trip, bog moss. This is the missing clue that he can't find on the land that he's found in the stomach contents. So anyways, I take off down this trail. And it's the hiking trail into the place, but it's also a main bear trail and moose trail and stuff like that. So the willows are up over your head and it's all full of mosquitoes because we're right on the river bottom. And so I dump my pack and I run down the trail and I can kind of look through the willows up to the mountainside and I can see, there looks like a meadow. So I bushwhack through the willows, get into this meadow and I'm going, perfect camp spot. Beautiful. It was a little bit spongy, but good with a tent on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a nice fresh stream flowing through it. I'm going, good, all we need. And it was like 10 minutes down the trail. So I get back out to the trail and mark it so I know where to cut in again and get back to everybody. Hey, Jim, found a nice meadow. We can get in there. We'll collect some firewood. We'll get a fire started. You can do your botanizing and stuff like that. So we put on our packs. We get back down the trail. I find my marker. We bust in through all these willows, get into this beautiful little meadow. And I mean, it's perfect. Guess what he finds? Bog moss. Uh-huh. He finds his bog moss. And again, it was the first time it had been identified in the north. And I wish I should put the Latin name down because it was a big deal to Jim that we found this actual bog moss.
Yeah.
And it was, again, we'd been probably walking by it.
Had that been in the Iceman's stomach?
Yeah. It was one of the mosses, but again, like I said, there's no culture on Earth that eats moss.
Right.
There's no, human.
So this is just stuff that's on your food.
Yeah, it was incidental. It was either in the water or on his hands or on the fish or whatever he was eating. That
Wow.
So anyways, we found this bog moss. So then now we got to get everybody across these rivers, and we're going to be picked up where we park. There's Jim's book called Ancient Ice Mummies.
Cool.
And
that's a great photo in the front.
And that's Ötzi. That's not our ice, man. It's Ötzi. Ours was all fragmented by the fracturing glacier over the years. So now we're getting to the very last. I'm just wondering if I should, let me see if a fantastically intellectual challenge. He studied the intact alimentary canal containing chyme, stomach, and intestinal contents. He was able to put together not just an approximate itinerary, but also a relative timeline of the last few days of Quadidon Sinchi's life. This is a first in archaeology and forensic science. He can tell you what Quadidon Sinchi ate for his last meal before he perished on the glacier. Quadidon Sinchi's basic isotope analysis indicated his diet consisted of 90% dietary protein from marine sources. But his hair isotope data indicated he had been eating a terrestrial diet for the last 3 months. The theory indicates he was a coastal Indian, Tlingit, traveled inland approximately for 3 months, returned to the coast and was approximately 50 miles inland when he perished. He had stomach full of seafood, sea asparagus, seal or whale blubber, crustacean, was carrying smoked salmon, and was traveling from the coast inland, not vice versa. Another aspect of the discovery was a communal DNA research where over 300 individuals donated their DNA to try and find kinship. They found 17 living descendants. I shook hands with 14 of the 17 living. There was another hair up your spine.
Yeah.
When you were shaking hands with someone from 20 generations ago's relatives.
Yeah.
Today. So they found 17 living descendants. And a curiosity about that was they identified themselves as belonging to the Wolf clan, which KDT belonged to the Wolf clan. So it was the matriarch's job to ensure that you didn't interbreed, so that you had to marry into a certain clan. So every one of those relatives indicated they married from the right clan.
Right.
And yet the DNA science from 500 years later proved that oral history, it was a combination of oral history and science, and that the oral history was as accurate as the science was, or one proved the other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a very significant, it explains all about that in the book, and I'll talk about that in a sec, which proves matriarchal oral history coincides exactly with the DNA science, which proves credibility and accuracy of First Nation oral history. Meeting direct descendants of Quadidon Sinchi was another quite spiritual event. Another interesting scientific tidbit was Quadidon Sinchi was carrying the tuberculosis gene.
Crazy.
And yet he wasn't infected.
Yeah.
And another. Did he have contact with Europeans, or was tuberculosis already here?
Right.
Kind of thing. Those are the questions that this brought up.
Sure.
Right. Then there's only speculation on how Quadidon Sinchi perished. Did he slip into a crevasse, or was he caught in a midsummer storm? Did he die of hypothermia? They've proven that he didn't slip in a crevasse because it wasn't crevasse ice where it was found.
Right.
They can tell by the topography underneath, which causes how the ice moves. And anyways, it's very interesting science. It's very interesting science.
Yeah.
Science can't answer that. What was he doing there? Maybe he was a messenger. Maybe he was a sheep hunter. The romantic theory, again, is that he met someone in the interior, was returning to the coast to get gifts for her family, or he was simply on a trade route.
Wow.
So here's where the dates, as technology advances, such as carbon dating techniques, the age of Tatshenshini is getting more accurate. The most recent results indicate he perished somewhere around 1700.
Okay.
So a few centuries more recent.
Yeah.
The results have been updated from the first results of 1,000 years ago to 550 years ago to now around 300 years ago. This is still very significant discovery because it still predates European contact by centuries in this area. But again, that comes with asterisks that it could be as recent as about 1800 kind of thing as well, or 1850. So there was trading on the coast for a long time. At that time. So
sure. But he really wasn't carrying any European goods.
But he wasn't carrying. He wasn't carrying.
Didn't you say he had a copper bead?
He had a 99% pure native copper bead that was actually shaped.
Okay.
And native copper is malleable enough that they can shape it and anneal it, and it was a perfect bead. I wish I had a picture of it.
Yeah.
There is a picture in the book, and I'll explain that in a minute. But so now we're on the final sequel, and in 2014, I went on a backpacking trip with a renowned explorer, adventure writer by the name of John Turk out of Darby, Montana.
Sure.
He lives in Fernie half the year.
That blew my mind.
Because you know John.
Well, the last time I seen John, I picked him up hitchhiking. He was shuttling a canoe. He'd done a trip down the Bitterroot, just like down right below his house.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago. But it was amazing. I followed his work, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've known him for a long time. Yeah.
So anyways, John, he wrote about Tatshenshini in his book, The Wake of the Yeoman.
Yep.
And John's theory was that, to explain who a yeoman was an ancient mariner, ancient Polynesian mariner, Southeast Asian in origin. And the theory was that the Kennewick man, who was found on the banks of the
back in Columbia River.
In Kennewick, Washington.
Yeah.
12,000-year-old skeleton wasn't American Indian.
Right.
And so that John's theory was that he came over by boat up the Pacific Rim and down, the west coast of North America.
Yeah.
Predates Beringia, the Bering Land Bridge, that they were here before the Bering Land Bridge was here. So it predates American Indian.
Right.
So to prove his theory, John threw his sea kayak off the north end of Japan and he paddled to Alaska.
Right.
And one of the most incredible sea kayaking journeys of all time.
Yeah.
So John and I got to meet in Fernie. I went to one of his book signings and we hit it off and we started talking and mentioned Tatshenshini. He's been to my presentations before and I've been to numerous of his. So because he writes about the ecology of deep wilderness, when he has a window in time that shows back when a person or a culture is connected to the natural world in a more holistic way than we are today, he wants to explore that. So we planned a trip in 2014, myself, John Turk, and another good friend and environmental and wilderness advocate, John Brzezinski, who is the executive director of WildSite, which is a very efficient and well-run environmental organization in British Columbia, very respectable environmental organization. Yeah. So we did a trip, and John's always followed my story, and we've done some wilderness trips together as well, and fought on numerous wilderness campaigns, and still do to this day. Right. And so we went on a trip, the three of us, and we wanted to go into the discovery site, but through the Samuel Glacier, not the route that we had been taking on our hunting trips or with Jim Dixon, but through Empty Valley, up the Tidewater Glacier. So that's what we did. We planned our trip. And you can see that John could be on downtown in the streets of Darby, Montana, or in the backcountry of the Tatshenshini, Elsac, glacier fields, and look the same. I mean, and being comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago they really lived in a very basic cabin up the West Fork.
Still do.
Yeah, I mean, he's about as no frills a person as I've ever known in my whole life.
Yeah.
And he makes no big deal about that either.
Just a lightweight hiking boot, and he sees John's and my Brzezinski's and my trekking poles, and he goes, Oh, that'd have been a great idea.
Yeah.
I got a set of those at home.
Yeah.
So we found him one. But again, an old backpack. But again, comfortable micro spikes. He suggests we get micro spikes if we're going to walk on this ice.
Yeah.
And those little Catahoula micro spikes, they're amazing. They're not your big crampons, which you're tripping and stumbling and kicking your back of your calf.
Stabbing yourself in the Achilles tendon.
Yeah. No, these are just a little tiny micro spike.
Like a yak track?
Like a yak track.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, they're rubber mounted. They go on your shoe. They're lightweight, and when you get on that ice, boy, oh boy, they're amazing. Hands in your pockets. Off we went. And again, jumping over as these glaciers are melting. This is going up that Tidewater Glacier. There's some better pictures, but heading up, we're right in the heart of the Samuel Glacier now.
Yeah.
Looking at crevasses.
There's getting some crevasse action in there.
And that's why you only walk on the old ice,
right?
Where not fresh snow, because it could be bridged over.
That's where you need the note from your wife.
That's exactly. And you don't tell her that you're going there.
This got your life insurance policy number on the very bottom.
That's right. Who to call. Yeah. And there's a moulin where the water creates a whirlpool and then swirls down into
sure.
And
which has also accounted for quite a few folks over the years, I promise.
Exactly.
Because a moulin like that it disappears into the depths of it. That might be 300-400 feet deep.
It could. I mean, I threw a rock down there and it was like 4 or 5 seconds before I even heard it. It might have hit the side of something. Who knows where the bottom was? You weren't hearing anything. You weren't hearing the waterland. That's for sure.
I can't remember who it was that said that. We lost him down a moulin. And at the time, this was a long time ago, I wasn't sure what that was. And later on, that's it.
Yeah. So here's that black. I mean, it's all the old ice, so it's all embedded with gravel and whatever's been calving off the ice of the side of these cliffs. That's right in the center of the Samuel Glacier, right in the bottom of Empty Valley.
Yeah. That's incredible. And now we may be losing the people watching this, but I was looking at that's an incredible landscape, man.
Yeah. And so again, now we're at the site, and John's most recent book called Crocodiles and Ice.
Okay.
It's about his. The majority of the book is about his polar circumnavigation of Ellesmere Island.
Yeah.
That he did in I think it was 2011, and where he's pulling his sea kayak when it was frozen and paddling in it when it was thawed. Mm-hmm. And again, his description of what happens to you when you're in deep wilderness and you go back to that natural rhythm and you start to recognize and notice things on the landscape that you wouldn't in this oil-soaked, internet-crazed, fast-paced, materialistic
I got to read
world
that book. I didn't know about that book.
Yeah, it just came out in September.
Yeah.
And there's about a half a chapter on the ice part. Well, not only that ice, but this ice here in the Tatshenshini. Yeah. And he talks about visiting the site and leaving gifts for Tatshenshini and just his whole experience about this trip with John and Brzezinski and myself.
Cool.
So it was pretty fun. There's John there, and again, another world-renowned traveler and explorer.
And these are not young men.
They're not young men. Turk was 65 here, and Brzezinski was 65
Gotcha.
Here. And the spectacular country. We did about 100-mile circumnavigation of that Samuel Glacier.
Yeah.
We went up the O'Connor into the Samuel Glacier, back out to the Parton, back up the Parton again, right back to where we started again.
Gotcha.
And then once we got out to the highway, we hitchhiked in John Turk fashion, back down to Haines Junction, or Haines, Alaska. So we went south. And then we hitchhiked up the Alaska Marine Highway to Skagway, and then we hitchhiked over White Pass into Carcross, and then back to Whitehorse again, where we met.
Did you have trouble getting rides or not?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. We had a fella from Indiana. He just retired. He was driving a big Dodge camper van. He was about 6'5". Oh, what was his name? Daryl? And he was going to visit his brother in Anchorage.
Yeah.
And he saw us hitchhiking. He must have been lonely because he was he was almost in Alaska and he drove from Indiana. And he saw us. He was slowing down a mile ahead. He wanted company. He was moving generators and sleeping bags and duffel bags. And we climbed in. And it was funny. We got to Haines, Alaska. And we said, Daryl, can we take you for dinner tonight? Thanks for giving us a ride and stuff like that, because we were all jammed in there.
Yeah.
Where are you guys staying? Oh, we're staying at such and such a hotel. Okay, good. I'm going to spend the night and stuff like that. And we're going, okay, so we'll meet you for dinner? Yeah. So he checked in. We met him for dinner at a certain restaurant in Haines, Alaska. And then we're sitting around that night and we're telling stories, and Turk starts telling about his mountain biking across Mongolia and his paddling to Alaska and meeting Molenuk, the ancient Koryakan shaman on the coast of Kamchatka, who's 90 years old and still trapping and fishing out in the tundra with her dog team and has spiritual powers and all this kind of stuff. And this Daryl he's just enthralled. He says, how long are you guys here for? I said, oh, probably 3 or 4 days. Then we're going to start making our way up up to Skagway.
Yeah.
Can I stay? I'll give you guys a ride right to Whitehorse. If can I hang out with you guys? Can I?
Yeah.
We're going. Of course you can. Sure, we're not trying to chase you away.
Right. Plus you got an RV.
Plus you got an RV. we got a ride.
Yeah.
So he stayed with us the whole time.
Yeah.
And again, he was just. I think by the stories that we were telling and all that stuff, and the Iceman story, again, he got to hear it in full thing, and as we're traveling up the coast.
Well, think about it, that's why you go to Alaska.
Yeah.
You leave Indiana and go see what's out there.
Yeah.
Now you're meeting these people who know the Iceman.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
awesome,
when we got to Whitehorse with him, we said, okay, Daryl, can we take you out for dinner one last time? We're finally here. John's stepson's going to meet us, yada, yada. Okay, so we sit down, we have dinner. So what are we doing tomorrow? Oh, well, we're going to go see Greg Hare. We're going to go to the Yukon Archaeological Branch office, and we're going to see 17-foot mammoth tusks. We're going to see saber-toothed tiger skulls. We're going to see short-faced bear skulls that are so heavy you can't pick them up. Daryl goes, I think I'm going to stick around another day. Time to go. Time to go.
Well, he hit the jackpot on that, man.
Yeah, because mammoth tusks, I said, they're just these big spirals, 17 feet long. It's amazing stuff that they have found coming out of the permafrost, and the ice. But look at the landscape that we're traveling through with Turk. Look where we're sitting having lunch. Yeah. And these are these tidewater glaciers that are probably 50 miles short today that were touching the ocean back then.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen a camp spot like that before?
No. Yeah, with that glacier.
With the glacier in the background.
Below it. Yeah.
And we're above it looking down on the whole Samuel Glacier with our teepee tent. And
and what tents are you using on that?
That was a Kifaru teepee tent. Yeah. So I think that was the 12-man, but which fits 3 with all your gear, especially if you want to get out of the flies or out of the weather and stuff like that. We had great weather for mid-July.
Yeah. Did it keep you dry?
Kept us dry.
Yeah. No floor, right?
No floor. So you bring a small tarp or a piece of Tyvek is the best. Just bring a little piece of that, folds up to nothing, and it's breezed yet it's waterproof, so you can put your sleeping pad right on it. So again, we found this big survey stake that John used. We just called him Moses after that. Yeah. So again, how introduced John into that, and then just how it all tied together.
Yeah.
And John did he actually won a writing award, and he did an article in not Backpacker, but a Canadian. It was either Canadian Geographic or. Anyways, he won a award on this trip and talked about Tatshenshini and his travels from the coast and how we followed that route. And
it's funny, he's publishing in places like I lost track of him.
Yeah. After
reading the Jomon.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he publishes in publications that I don't know anything about, And as we were talking about last night, he is a hunter and a fisherman, subsistence hunter and fisherman to the max.
Yeah.
And always has been.
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. He'd be a great one to catch up on. So there's his recent book right there. There he is trekking across, Ellesmere Island, pulling a sea kayak.
Right on.
And things are falling apart on him, both physically and his gear.
Yeah.
And talking about the trials and the turmoils.
Yeah.
And then the book finally came out, and it's a compilation of all the science that we've been asking for years.
Gotcha.
And it's been in production for years. It came out in November. You can find it on at the Royal BC Museum bookstore. The Royal BC Museum is in Victoria, British Columbia.
Okay.
So our Royal BC Museum, and it'll come up in their bookstore, and it's called Tatshenshini, Teachings from a Long Ago Person Found.
Cool.
And it's a 2-inch thick,
I saw it last night.
about a second university level written, detailed, technical, from the glaciology to the culture to the actual person himself, to all his artifacts. I mean, our story is chapter 1. It starts off, hey Mike, look, a stick, and that starts the discovery and why we were there. And again, we haven't hidden to this moment that we were there hunting, and we were on the land hunting, and as hunters, we were rewarded for that. So.
Wow. Man, it's an incredible story. I was so glad that we hooked this up today because after I heard it last night, and I know it was an abbreviated shot.
20 years and 20 minutes.
But it's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Oh, thanks, Hal.
And I just wanted to listen.
You set the stage pretty, you set...
they made me tell that story.
You set the bar pretty hard, pretty high.
we went from bass fishing in North Florida.
Yeah, to Dall sheep hunting in the Tatshenshini. Yeah. We covered it all last night.
I'd wind up on one... you and I are gonna do another podcast this winter sometime. Tell me with who?
Yeah, I'd like to get up and interview a fellow by the name of Mike Hawkridge.
Okay.
And he's a guide outfitter in northern BC. He's one of the first members of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers British Columbia chapter. He was one of the first directors. I just met him finally in person at our pint night in Prince George 2 weeks ago. He's an outfitter, trapper, guide outfitter, trapper, cowboy, rancher, farrier. He's a wilderness advocate. He has good relationships with the First Nations in his area. He's very connected and very well respected.
Excellent.
And so it's, again, to get that, that Caribou Chilcotin kind of feel as we move north, and Mike's contacts up there, and he's the real deal.
Awesome. Well, that's what we're going to be shooting for after hunting. This be after a big game season in Montana,
exactly.
probably.
And after you try to track down Turk too, because that would be another good chat.
Well, hopefully he'll be back in the Bitterroots.
He's there all summer. He's there all summer, and then he's usually in Fernie about the middle of November.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks, Bill.
Hey, thanks, Hal.
Enjoyed
this
it, man.
Was awesome. Yeah. I got a little more time to talk. We spent a couple hours there.
We did good. Well, it's hard to do justice to this particular deal in less time.
Yeah, it is.
So if you want this story, you can hang out and you can cut it off and then drive and then cut it back on.
You betcha. Yeah. That's the thing about podcasts.
Right on.
Thanks,
See
Hal.
you, man.
You betcha.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. If you want to know more about backcountry hunters and anglers, you want to get in touch with us, donate, stay up to date on the news, explore conservation issues, you can go to backcountryhunters.org, and that's the best way to find us. Thank you.